Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be our review special for Legend of Korra Runes of the Empire Part 3. So that's going to be the main topic of this podcast. We're going to be reviewing the final part of Runes of the Empire, which has just been recently released, but we'll also be covering some news. This is the official podcast for the fan site avatarthelastairbender.online.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So we'll start off with the news. A bunch of stuff has happened. There's been just some random pieces of news, and then we had Toyfair happen. And I suppose we'll also talk about how the anniversary sort of came and went without anything really happening. But we'll start with this piece of news. And obviously, just a little bit before the anniversary, this happened. Someone asked Jeremy Zuckerman, of course, the composer, Avatar and Korra, any hope for a release of the remaining Legend of Korra OSTs. The music was wonderful, and it's such a shame there's only one album released. His response: let me just say this, it's looking good, winky face. So obviously this got all of the hardcore fans like, oh, he said something again. Once again he said something about like positive about the soundtrack. This is probably the most clear he's ever been about being like, it is good, something good is happening, it's looking good for the release of the rest of the soundtracks. So obviously, it was prior to the anniversary. We were maybe hoping that something would happen then. As of right now, nothing has come of this, but it's got a lot of people talking because the soundtrack is probably the most wanted thing in a way in the fandom. It's the thing we haven't had. It's weird that we don't have it even though the music is so well liked. What is your interpretation of this statement from Jeremy Zuckerman?
I don't know. I mean, the fact that he said anything at all makes it seem like it's positive, right? I mean, and I guess like having, the winky face, the emoji in it is like the best news that we've ever got, which is sad to think about for, having a soundtrack. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess, there are more things moving with Avatar, especially with the live action show. So it seems like, things are moving around that could actually lead to this, actually meaning that it's coming out. But I mean, personally, I'll just, if it comes out, it comes out. If it doesn't come out, I guess it's still not really going to come out. But I mean, just, I don't know. I mean, this isn't like something like super new that we've ever heard, him saying something about, possibly getting the soundtrack recorded. I mean, there's been plenty of interviews where they've talked about it before and that, they would definitely be willing to do it. So I don't know. I mean, it gives, slightly more hope, I suppose. But, when it comes out is when I'll pay real attention to it, I suppose.
Yeah, because it's just been back and forth about, like, one time he'll say, like, oh, good progress is being made. The next he's like, oh, it might not happen. Now, very positive, but again, until there's actually, like, concrete information about, like, what exactly is happening, it's still very unclear. And that, does he just mean Korra soundtrack, or are we bringing Avatar into this as well? Because you'd think, like, at this point, why not just release all of the music and just, lump it all into one instead of trying to make multiple different projects. We don't really know yet. We'll see what happens. It's literally just waiting for an announcement. Next piece of news is that Legend of Korra Runes of the Empire Library Edition was finally announced. We've been waiting for this for a while. They usually announce it like just before Part 3 comes out, and that's exactly what they did here. So we have the cover reveal and the release date. So it's going to be September 9th for comic book stores, and September 22nd mass market is when it's coming out. The cover is pretty nice here. It's obviously by Michelle Wong. Pretty cool shot of like Team Avatar plus Kuvira sort of standing on the top of some of the kind of runes of the Empire, basically some Earth Empire machinery. It definitely gets across sort of like the theme of the book for sure, just seeing like Kuvira part of Team Avatar effectively. So I definitely like it. And then in the description they do mention that like, oh yeah, the Korra library editions are done slightly differently than the Avatar ones. There's a sketchbook section, artist commentary. So Obviously, we switched artists from Irene Ko to Michelle Wong, so maybe they're just highlighting that Michelle Wong has done a little bit more of the commentary herself, whereas I think it was the editor who did it primarily for Turf Wars. So I think that's all it's really trying to say there. But what are your thoughts on the cover here for the Runes of the Empire Library Edition?
I like the cover. I think the cover looks really good. I think they do usually a pretty good job on the covers for the library editions of the books. So I think it definitely fits the mode of the actual sort of series and stuff. So no, it's a really good one.
Next up, we'll get into some of the Toy Fair 2020, New York Toy Fair 2020 news. So we knew going in we were for sure going to get the reveal of the Diamond Select action figures Wave 2 and 3. But the surprising thing that came out of this was also the announcement of this Diamond Select Toys statue. It's the title that they have here is Avatar Gallery Aang PVC statue. They're saying here it's going to retail for $49.99, and it's going to come out summer 2020. And it's a really nice looking Book 3 Aang. Crazy airbending sort of clear plastic, sort of clear PVC effect part stuff going on here. Really cool pose. He's got the staff. It looks really, really nicely sculpted, and it's reasonably priced compared to most of the statues we've had ever like announced for Avatar and Korra. They've either been insanely priced at like 300 plus for the Korra Asami statue, or they've been like 100 for those kind of Lin ones that's Wire Industries did, or else really cheap, the Chibi statues that's Wire did. So I actually like this sort of middle ground price point, and that it's not overly expensive, and then it still looks really, really good. So this is something, if I can see a pre-order for this and it's not going to cost crazy for shipping, I probably am going to get this just because Aang's my favorite character. But what are your thoughts on this statue that's been surprise announced?
Yeah, no, I think the statue is awesome. It definitely looks really good. The clear effect that you mentioned definitely gets across like the motion of the air. I think it, really feels like, those statues that you see when you go to the fairs and the conventions and stuff that have like the really good effects on them. Usually for like anime characters is usually the ones that I always see that have the really good effects with them. So no, this definitely looks on par with that, especially with the character in general. I think Aang is definitely on model, almost perfectly for, all of this sort of design that they have here. So no, it's definitely really cool to see. I definitely didn't expect something like this, and especially what you say for like the price around $50. I think that's probably the best price we've ever had for something of this sort of quality, because they have all been really generally more expensive and not, unless you're really into the characters, it's either hit or miss for you. So this definitely seems like one that could go, could be a really good seller in general, just because it's, the most popular character, obviously.
Yeah, and they've done, I suppose, the thing, they've avoided, I suppose, some of the problems maybe some of the other stuff has encountered of, like, most people ultimately want the kind of character designs that we're sort of more recently familiar with rather than their, like, original design. So I appreciate definitely they're going for the Book 3 Aang rather than Book 1 Aang. I think that's probably what happened with some of the Dark Horse statues that they did a few years back, and that they just were, fairly standard, just like, oh, it's Book 1 Korra, Book 1 Aang. This at least is like Book 3 Aang doing a really cool pose. It's kind of going all out. So that'll be cool. I don't think there's been much information on it outside of just pictures. Like, I don't know if pre-orders have gone up just yet, but the convention just happened like a few days ago, so there's still time for that stuff to happen. Next, we'll get into the expected news here. Wave 2 and 3 of the Diamond Select action figures have been announced. It's not incredibly clear which wave is which, but I assume the cards are in front of the wave. So the way the pictures are ordered, Wave 3 is actually first. So it looks like Wave 3 is going to be Sokka, Sozin's Comet Aang, and Sozin's Comet Ozai. Sokka comes with the boomerang, some weird clear frosted plastic disc, and some other frosted plastic thing. I have no idea what the other thing is, if it's even meant to be an accessory, but they're in front of Sokka. They don't look like anything I've ever seen him use. And the other thing here as well is that Sokka's face, has definitely been discussed a bit online since these have been revealed. I definitely think this needs to change before release. This, to me, doesn't really look like Sokka that much. I think it's a weird expression. I think it feels like they sort of almost changed the like art style of the faces compared to Wave 1 as well. So I hope that's just like a prototype face because it's like Wave 3 and not Wave 2. Other than that, I think like the body, the boots, the colors and stuff like that looks really, really good. I just want to know what the deal is with the accessories and the face. But what are your thoughts on the Sokka figure?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much in line with that. The face, I mean, the expression seems like something that he would make in the show, but the model of how they did the face shape doesn't really seem to be in line with what, I recognize from the actual show. So I don't know, it's interesting that they chose such a specific, like, look for him in general. Like, usually, unless they're doing like a specific like sort of like action pose with the characters, usually their faces are more neutral like. So it's interesting that he's not really doing anything and they gave him such a specific face. I wonder if there's like a real sort of reason behind that, or if this is just sort of like like you said, sort of like a prototype thing. And yeah, with the accessories, I really have no idea what those are because it's not something that I recognize. I mean, yeah, he has a shield that he's used before, but it hasn't looked like that.
My only interpretation of this is, are they going down the road of just the figures come with accessories and the accessories are not maybe tied to that character, in that is the disc meant to be like an ice disc for like a waterbender character to be like throwing?
I guess.
And then the other thing is meant to be some sort of a like ice path type thing along the ground, like we've sort of seen characters do. Like when they sort of skate across the ground, they like make a kind of ice ramp to slide across. That's what it kind of looks like, because it's like flat on one end and then it kind of goes more vertical on the other. I don't really know, but I that's the only thing that fits, because it sort of looks like it's ice basically, but I'm not really sure. The other thing there is that they're all on the black stands, so they might be just like the Walgreens exclusive if that still keeps up into these other waves. I don't really know. So there might be other accessories, but we'll move on to the next figure. So next, going sort of left to right here, is Sozin's Comet Aang. So this is Avatar State Aang from his battle with Ozai. So the face sculpt is done with like Avatar State on, so the eyes are white, the arrows are white all across the body. It's obviously kind of like shirtless Aang. The accessory seems to be this pretty crazy accessory that like attaches into his back, that's meant to get across the idea of the like rotating rings of all of the elements. So you have air, earth, water and fire. It's a very cool part. And it also, just based on the background, it looks like this thing comes with the full splayed out Book 3 glider as well, which seems like a massive accessory. Which again, it doesn't really fit this Aang necessarily, because like when he's in the Avatar state he's not on the glider, but I guess it's meant to be that he had it just before the battle started. But still, huge accessory, like bigger than anything that any of the other figures come with, apart from one we'll get to in a second. What are your thoughts on this Aang?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think out of all the ones here, this one doesn't really bother me as much. I don't know. I wonder if this is going to be like one of those things where it's like sort of like glow in the dark or whatever, because that might be cool if it looks that way. I mean, with just the eyes as is, it looks, it looks okay, I think, for me personally. I don't know. I mean, it definitely seems like they have a lot of, you can see like all the articulation that he's going to have and whatnot. So that part looks pretty cool. And the effect part, even though, like the scaling of it obviously is a bit off since it would be a lot bigger per the show or whatever. It looks interesting enough the way that they have it here. So it's kind of cool just to see, their interpretation of that sort of effect on this character. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. It's cool, I guess. I don't know. I mean, the glider itself that's also another interesting one just to see. I wonder if that's like, you can swap out, the effect part for the glider, and that can be like attached to him, so it seems like he's flying with it, even though, like you said, it doesn't really make as much sense per, just sort of what actually happened and how he, wouldn't really need it at that time. So I don't know. That's interesting. I wonder if there are like, I don't know if like a swap out head or something like that. If that would even work with the whole rest of the body obviously being still glowed up. So I don't know. It's an interesting one that they chose to go with, but I think it doesn't stand out to me as much as being like really bad. It's just sort of interesting choices that they have.
Yeah, I'm kind of just wondering, like, how is that glider gonna fit in the box? Like, the boxes for these figures are just like really big, but even still, like, that's a huge accessory just to fit in there with the figure and another relatively big accessory. I definitely like it. I'm glad we're getting like an Avatar State Aang, just because I always think, like, especially an Airbender Avatar with the tattoos, it looks very cool. And then because of the way they're doing Ozai, I sort of get the idea of like having the final battle, like both characters being the same
Yeah.
wave. And then I actually really like the kind of four element effect part. Like, it's not, obviously it'd be an insane effect part to do it exactly the way they do it in the show, but I like this as just an alternate interpretation of, like, I'd like to see an Avatar do something like that, like a claw of each element type thing. That's I suppose it sort of fits a little bit. It's almost like Aang forming his like final attack that was about to obliterate Ozai
Yeah.
type thing. But still, it definitely gets across the idea. Um, so that's pretty good. The next one up is Sozin's Comet Ozai. So the counterpoint to the Aang, it's a shirtless Ozai as well. His effect part seems to be his sort of like fire flying rocket booster foot type thing. By the looks of it, you just swap out one of the feet with this one, and it has the fire coming off it. And I suppose you put the other foot on the stand, and you get across the idea that, like, he's kind of on the path to kind of boosting around the place like he does during that fight. Other than that, I think the sculpt is really good. The face sculpt, this is probably the best face sculpt in like the entire line. And arguably the figure full stop seems like it's one of the best ones. And I think that's just because it's like obviously a fully grown character, whereas all the other characters have like fairly thin arms and stuff like that, so the articulation doesn't work as well. Here it looks like just that little bit better because this is sort of the full scale of the figure line being used. So I definitely think this looks really, really good. And if you're getting the Aang, you need to get the Ozai to go with it. And Ozai tends to sort of be a little forgotten in some of these things, and that like he wasn't included in like the first wave of the Funko Pops, but we're getting him fairly early here. So I definitely like that we're finally getting Ozai merchandise. But what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, no, I agree that the sculpt for him is definitely one of the best ones, if not the best out of all of them. I think it definitely fits. It reminds you of, specifically how he is in the show when everything's sort of going crazy and he's trying to like hold on to things. So no, I think for all of them, I think that one definitely fits the mold of that book 3 sort of look for him, especially. And it is interesting that I guess they chose to go with the boosting of the Firefoot. I mean, I guess that is pretty iconic that was his way of moving around, so that is definitely something that you keep in mind from the show. It would be interesting to see how that actually works when you sort of attach it, how it's actually sort of like how the stand part of it actually works with it and everything. But no, I think it's definitely pretty cool. I wonder if they give him any other sort of effect or if that's just sort of it, since it is, I guess, kind of a larger piece.
Yeah, because the Wave 3 ones, it definitely feels like they're going for that Walgreens one, so the accessories might not be completely accurate, but, I suppose the idea is if you're collecting the full line, you have the giant fire effect part from Zuko that you can still use for Ozai with some of the stands, but, it'll be interesting if they do anything else, because it would just be another fire attack. I suppose for him, maybe you'd go for the sort of like, I don't know what we really call that signature technique that he uses, the sort of like comet attack that he tries to use to sort of crack open Aang's kind of earth kind of prison thing. That could be an option. But we'll move it across to Wave 2, which for some reason isn't on the other side of the display cabinet, assuming this is correct anyway. Wave 2 seems to be Azula, Toph, and then Book 1 Aang. So we are getting 3 Aangs, one in each wave. It's kind of unfortunate, but they're getting the main character out of the way first, and I assume we'll likely see repaints and redos of other characters as we go on. So I suppose first up is Azula, who The one thing to me with Azula is that it also seems like they've gone for like Sozin's Comet Azula as well, rather than just sort of standard like book 2, most of book 3 Azula, just because of like the messy hair and stuff like that. I think it's a little too specific for Azula, whereas the specificity works for Ozai because it's his one action sequence. That it's fine to have the action figure be the one action sequence, but I think I prefer sort of composed Azula for the main Azula figure, rather than the sort of hair out of place, you know, kind of manic Azula. Other than that, I really like the sculpt. I can see them just in general across all these figures maybe doing a second pass on the head sculpts, in that like I think Azula has maybe a slight element of the sort of Sokka issue going on, but in general I think it's all right. The effect part for her, I'm not. Is it meant to be lightning? Is it meant to be blue fire? I'm not really sure. It doesn't seem thin enough to be lightning, and then it doesn't seem thick enough to just be a blue fire attack. So I hope that effect part would change, especially when she doesn't come with anything else. But I love like the paintwork on the armor and stuff like that. I think it looks really good otherwise. But what are your thoughts on Azula here?
Yeah, no, I agree. The paintwork on her is definitely pretty good. Other than, like you mentioned, with the face sculpt, I think it's pretty much on par. I mean, I guess, you know, if they're going for the book 3 and they're going for like sort of like the iconic look that we sort of see of the characters in that sort of moment, I mean, her being disheveled does sort of stand out in that regard. Before it being sort of like the first time we're sort of seeing the character, and you know, her having, you know, a lot of other sort of appearances on the show in general, and I guess, I mean, her outfit, you know, generally stays pretty much the same, so you could have easily done sort of like, you know, any sort of head shape with this sort of outfit and it probably would look pretty good. So no, I would have definitely thought that they would have done a more sort of neutral face, you know, along the lines with Saga, just to keep him sort of basic to sort of begin with. But other than that, like you said, it definitely does look pretty good. You know, the model looks sort of on point for that sort of character there. And yeah, it is interesting with the sort of her sort of fire effect there. I mean, I don't know. For me, it definitely looks more fire-ish than lightning just because of the tone that they kept it. And it's not sort of like, you know, more jaggy is how I would sort of like envision lightning to be. But, you know, the actual sort of pose that she's doing there, you know, almost lends yourself to thinking more sort of how she does the lightning more than the fire generally, at least. Not that she can do them, you know, multiple ways regardless. So I don't know, that definitely is interesting. I wonder if they will sort of change that sort of effect. I think that'd probably be like one of the easier things for them to do rather than, you know, of course, going to the whole face and everything. But I don't know, it'd be interesting to see sort of the timeline for this and seeing where they actually sort of go with developing these characters, because it definitely, I don't know, maybe this is just sort of like a really sort of early view of seeing all these characters.
Then we move into, I suppose, the big talking point of Wave 2 here. We get our Toph figure, seemingly as part of Wave 2. She comes with 2 accessories. One is a pretty cool Earth effect part on the ground. That's like a kind of, you know, current of Earth, and then it goes up into like a bigger sort of ramp type thing. Pretty fitting for Toph. And then it also seems like she comes with the Earth Rumble belt, which is a very cool little accessory. The thing here, though, is that, again, the body looks spot on, a lot of the details of her outfit, and a lot of the details of her head are fine. It's just that, like myself and others have pointed out, why is her head so big compared to her body? They have to change this before release. Like, you look at any screenshot of Toph in the show, these are not the proportions of the character. Like, the head I think is fine. They could probably do with maybe just a little bit more of an expression, just to turn the very neutral expression into a bit of a smirk, but other than that, I think it's relatively okay in terms of like the way they do the eyes, the details on her like headband, and just hair in general. And it's not just because Toph has big hair; it's just her head, full stop, is way too big. So if they can fix that and get the scaling right, this is a pretty much like, I suppose, perfect Toph figure for me. But your thoughts on Toph?
Yeah, no, the head size is definitely, you know, it stands out just as being sort of awkward to the character. I don't know, maybe because we see it so much that, you know, we automatically sort of key into it. But even without that, you know, it just seems like it just doesn't fit the character. Like, it's, you know, her whole head goes over like the collar of her shirt there, which generally doesn't happen that much unless it's sort of like folded out. So just the proportions there is definitely sort of odd for sure. But other than that, yeah, like you said, everything else, the effect parts, sort of the sculpt in general, her actual outfit design, everything, seems like it would be on par. I think this one, even if this is a small character, I feel like her body design proportion works better for me than sort of Aang does actually, just because of her just general sizing of how they actually did it. So that I think they actually did really good job on.
Mm-hmm. And then the last figure here, Book 1 Aang, so they've gone back to him. And yeah, it's the Book 1 Aang, the typical, first outfit here. Comes with loads of accessories. He comes with another Momo, so the original one came with a Momo. He comes with his staff, both folded up and completely out. And also an extra top bit of his outfit to make the articulation work, because of course he needs to be able to actually look like he's using his glider, so his arms have to be sort of pointing up, which they can't do if his outfit's in the normal position. That was something that definitely was the thing with Wave 1, is that the outfits and the way they are not really designed to be particularly great action figures, and so you encountered the articulation hitting off the clothing a lot, so they're trying to resolve that here. And again, I think it's a pretty good Book 1 Aang, in that his outfit here obviously allows his lower kind of body to be a little bit more free than the Book 3 one. I wish we had more pics of his face, because I think it's a pretty good sculpt, but I want to know what I suppose the inside of his mouth open actually looks like. I think it looks okay, but I've seen some people say it looks a bit weird, so I'm not overly sure. But again, whoa, loads of accessories on this character. But your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, he definitely does have a lot of stuff, but yeah, I don't know, his face, I don't know, it feels closer on model than, obviously some of the other ones that we've talked about that have had specific issues. I don't know, it really sort of stands out to me, and I'm not sure if it's necessarily in a good or a bad way, but overall I think the figure is, pretty good for what they're sort of, working for with this sort of character. It definitely seems like him being sort of a smaller, thinner type character that doesn't sort of help as far as action figure, the model figure sort of design in general. So his arms feel a little bit odd to me just because of how thin they are, but that's probably actually in proportion overall. But no, he definitely has a lot of stuff that comes with him, so that's definitely pretty cool to see him come with so much stuff.
Yeah. And he's probably the biggest example of all the joint and articulation cuts, really sort of ruining the flow of the design. A lot of the others is covered up by some piece of clothing, or it's all the same color plastic, but this is, it just looks a little bit weird, some of the angles they have. But, Book 1 Aang, they sort of had to do it at some point. I'm going to guess waves 4 and 5 will probably feature Book 1 Zuko and Book 3 Katara and stuff like that, alongside I suppose Mei, Ty Lee, those type of things. But yeah, they're saying here summer 2020 for Wave 2 and then fall 2020 for Wave 3. And I suppose we'll see how exactly exclusives, if there is a Walgreens version compared to the standard retail version or not this time out. And we'll see if any changes are made. So the main thing for most people seems to just be primarily just fix the faces on Toph and Sokka, and for the most part you should be okay. I get the impression it's probably just prototype sculpts here. The bodies are probably realistically done. It's just perfecting the head sculpt is probably the main thing. And we'll see how it goes from there. So yeah, that's all the Toy Fair news. And I suppose the last thing before we get into the comic review is just the fact that the anniversary went by without anything happening. No news actually happened on the day as such. I know Nickelodeon did release that sort of panel they did at Nick with some of the creative team from ATLA talking about things. You had Giancarlo Volpe and some of the art team and stuff like that. I think the Zuko's voice actor was there and stuff like that. But
oh yeah,
I didn't watch it because I sort of know the way those conversations go. I think some people may be reading into some stuff, but from what I could tell, nothing really happened. There was no comic announcement or news. I think the most surprising thing was that like they didn't even announce the Promise Omnibus cover, which mentioned the anniversary, and then we still don't have the next comics announced, and that we are now in that weird position where there's no new story content announced for the future. Like it's just reprint books going forward in terms of comics, and we have no idea about the other stuff. Obviously, we know there is another Avatar comic coming. We know it's pretty deep into production, and we realistically know there's another Korra comic coming, but they haven't been announced yet. And I'm wondering why they're holding back on this as we enter March, basically. What are your thoughts on just the fact that there wasn't any news after this sort of being hyped up as a sort of big a big anniversary with like the DVD, the Blu-ray set coming out, a few mentions of it in other places, and so on?
Yeah, I don't know. It's odd. I mean, it did seem, at least, for a little bit, that there was sort of, news about this going around, and that, there might be something happening, but it definitely didn't seem like anything worth noting happened at all. I did hear about the interview, and I saw that they were at like some other places, and because I saw something on Instagram about people going to there and like getting some autographs or whatever. But as far as actual news content or anything like that, it definitely doesn't seem. I don't know. It doesn't seem like there was anything really big put forward to it. So I don't know. Definitely, I don't know. I don't think. Maybe there's just not much really right now that they really have to sort of work with it. But, we're assuming that we're sort of, still getting the comics because everything, currently at least still points to that still being, worth them actually sort of, producing in general. So it doesn't seem like there'd be any reason to stop that. But I don't know. It definitely seems like they're taking their time with this one, which may be for the best. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the only thing is just like, how long are they going to wait? Especially for that Avatar book when we know... I think Peter Wharton's put up a few updates about like percentage completion on books, and like I think my understanding of that is that like he's like a good bit into the second book, and that realistically art on the first part is done, I think. So that should be announced any time now, but unless they're waiting until like San Diego Comic-Con, which seems ages away, I don't know when this is coming. I guess it's just going to be a random week. It just goes up, unless they decide to turn Emerald City Comic-Con into a news announcement, which for the most part it doesn't tend to be, but we'll see what happens. So yeah, we'll move into the second part of the podcast here, the main topic, our review of the new comic, Legend of Korra: Runes of the Empire Part 3. So this book, I suppose, officially came out this week, though there was some weirdness with this one in that when the Google Books preview went up, basically the day afterwards, the whole book was just up online. Like, super amazing quality. I don't think it was just someone compiled all the pages from the Google preview into the book and uploaded it. It just seemed like the book was like leaked online somewhere. So a lot of people read this book like a month before release, and then there was confusion about, I think a lot of shops, comic shops in America were selling the book early as well, and so it was one of those really fractured releases where like no one was really reading the book at the same time. So there wasn't as much, I suppose, hype about the actual release date, despite it being, I think, a very exciting book. So let's get into this here. So we'll start with our general thoughts on the book, then we'll go through it page by page, analyze it, and then finish off with any final thoughts that we need. So overall, Greg, what were your thoughts on the final part of Runes of the Empire?
Overall, I thought it was pretty good. I think for the most part, it did what it needed to do to sort of conclude the story to sort of like a reasonable degree. I think there's definitely various things that I wish they would have sort of expanded upon, or if they had more time, they could expand into the future. And who knows, maybe that will be something that they do. It definitely seems like they definitely felt like they crammed a good bit into this to sort of get to the point that they wanted to at the end, which I guess with it being the 3 parts that they have, is sort of had to sort of be laid out that way. So I don't know. I think overall it did pretty well. I think there's definitely some moments in it which I wish they would have expanded upon and have, I guess sort of more involvement from various characters. I think that's probably the thing that I would be most sort of critical about.
Yeah, I feel very similarly. In general, I think you have to praise this book for for the first time in a while, one of the comics doing something important that feels must read. Like, you have to know what happens next with Kuvira, what path they're taking her on. That is much more than the last two comics did. For sure, Turf War is indefinitely in balance, and while, yes, I think you can absolutely discuss should they have executed on it better. Like you say, is there stuff they could have expanded on? Definitely, but at the same time, like, I think, criticizing, like, a big plot for not doing it perfectly versus, like, what was the plot in, like, the last two comics? Like, was there even anything to expand on? I'm definitely going to give the praise more to the book that was a bit ambitious and didn't quite get it, over a book that didn't really try to do all that much. And yeah, like, I think you come out of this and, like, we've learned a good amount about Kuvira, some solid stuff with, like, Su Yin, Opal, and while, yeah, Team Avatar didn't really get much to do in this book, the focus was always on Kuvira, ultimately, and they did that well. They did the, like, woo, Earth Kingdom politics stuff pretty well. So I come out of this being pretty positive that I want more books along the lines of this, but with some better execution than some of the previous books we've had. So let's get into it and where it has its ups and downs. So we start off with this opening scene here with Su, Wei Wing, Opal, Toph, brainwashed Asami, Korra, and Kuvira all arriving back at Zhao Fu. So this is sort of Kuvira's big return to Zhao Fu. Su does say to Kuvira, "You're going to have to face him sooner or later," because, of course, the setup at the end of the last book is that they're going to need Betar Jr.'s help to try and reverse the brainwashing. He's the only one with enough technical knowledge to kind of counter Dr. Sheng's information, because they've kind of worked together. So this is where we get the idea that, like, oh yeah, Betar is under house arrest here in Zhao Fu, and now Kuvira is effectively also under that same house arrest here, since they're both effectively prisoners. And, we just have Asami being put in one of the rooms because she's also under house arrest, being brainwashed, and Korra promises her that they will find a way to help her. And it's at this point we get introduced to Betar. So we get to see him for the first time pretty much in the comics. And what he says is, "I never thought you'd have the courage to return home. Hello, Kuvira." She says, "I didn't know if I'd ever see you again." And he replies and says, "And you wouldn't have if Korra and her friends hadn't saved me." Kuvira tries to explain herself and says, "I feel terrible about what happened, but you remember all the pressure we were under. I'm sure if you'd been in my position, you would have." He cuts her off and says, "Tried to kill my fiancé with a blast of spirit energy? Never. I loved you, Kuvira. When Mother told me you were coming, she mentioned that you were trying to change. I didn't believe her. I had to see for myself. But you're exactly the same." And he storms off and slams the door in her face, leaving her very, confused. She's seen this reaction from other characters over the first two parts, and now Betar is kind of giving her the same treatment. Her past actions coming up once again, and her perhaps not handling it the best. What are your thoughts on this first Betar-Kuvira interaction?
Yeah, it definitely seems like this is the one where she's having the most issue as far as reconciling with what she's done before. So I guess this really is sort of like the beginning, you could say, of her really sort of seeing the error of her ways here, seeing arguably the person that she was the closest with really sort of take offense of everything that she sort of has done before, and her at least initial attempts at sort of showing that she sort of means different or did mean different clearly isn't working here. So no, I think this is definitely a good way to sort of see their interaction the first time and to see how she's not dealing as well.
Yeah, I like this because it just contrasts this. We finally get, I suppose, the answer in a way to what we had before of, like, okay, this was their approaches to the relationship. She put the Earth Empire over the relationship. He was the reverse. He would always choose her over the Earth Empire. That if the decisions were switched, he wouldn't have made the same decision she did. And that's why he's so hurt by what happened, and why he is so upset at her, even after everything that's happened, her trying to change, still kind of trying to defend her own actions. And it links into the whole, is she taking responsibility for her actions? And this is another example of, like, she's kind of reverting a little bit to her old self, but we'll see that kind of growth as it goes on. So Korra immediately rushes in after Betar, because of course they still need his help. They need to inform him about the brainwashing. So she goes to talk to Betar about that, as we cut to a new scene. So we cut to Gaoling City Hall, and brainwashed Wu walks in and basically demands that the election is going to take place today. The mayor tries to be like, we have to give time, multiple days for people to show up, but Wu is like, no, it's happening right now. Don't defy your king. The election is happening today. And so immediately it's just announced here that I will go let the voters in. So while everyone else is trying to figure out how to stop this exact thing from happening, they don't realize that the election is actually happening right now. So what are your thoughts on this first scene with brainwashed Wu?
Yeah, this is definitely interesting to get to see how, how Wu would be controlled in this sort of situation, how he would sort of act. I think it's interesting to see him with such sort of like an angry expression where he says, how dare you defy your king? Because it's such a contrast to how we normally see him sort of, smiling and bubbling around, or even being sad at sometimes. Even when he's trying to be serious, in most cases, he's usually still has like sort of like a smirk on his face somehow. So, to see him in this sort of way, it's definitely an interesting sort of contrast that we haven't really seen before, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is definitely one of the more significant effects, I suppose, of the brainwashing. They have Wu, they have his power, so they're able to make this all happen immediately. But we cut back to Zhao Fu at this point, and we have the big sort of dinner scene here at the table. Korra informs everyone that Betar is willing to work with everyone. Kuvira's like, oh, that's wonderful news that he will work with me on this. And Korra says, he agreed to temporarily put aside his anger towards you in order to help the greater good. He still feels guilty for everything he did when he was part of the Earth Empire. And Opal chimes in and says, unlike some people, obviously referring to Kuvira. And so we have a little bit of a moment between these two, like the sisters basically, but it's obviously an unexplored dynamic. And scenes between these two come up a few times over the course of the book. And they're trying to make it into an interesting dynamic. They're linking it into what we saw of it in book 4. But I think the entire problem with this is just that we never, ever see what these two were like in the past. And I don't think it's entirely the fault of this book. I do think a lot of the blame goes on book 3 and 4 also for never showing us this dynamic. That without this comic, we go into this book we're just told that Sue adopted Kuvira. We don't get any of that actual connection, family in the show itself, really. So it's only through the bits and pieces we get here that it's all beginning to get filled in. So I suppose it's just one page, but what are your thoughts on what they're doing here? This first kind of moment of Opal, snapping back at Kuvira.
I don't know. I think it is interesting. I mean, like you said, without having much sort of basis for it in the past, it doesn't really, their closeness of their connection doesn't quite seem sort of as strong. I mean, you can see it sort of just by default with, Kuvira and Su Yin, and of course Kuvira and Betar, but with some of the other family members, there's definitely not as much there. And yeah, there is sort of there's a lot of characters in Sue's family, so it would be hard to give enough sort of screen time for all of them. But with them sort of pushing that as much in these comics, it definitely it doesn't quite seem as sort of warranted, as at least initially seems. I mean, they do try to do some stuff later on that we'll talk about that sort of brings it a little bit more to light. But I guess sort of initially, it just seems like she's more so just sort of upset at Kuvira rather than sort of there being something deeper that you can really sort of latch on to quite yet.
Yeah, because I think the one leap that this book basically asks you when you read it to take is that you have to logically go on the idea that Kuvira was part of the Beifong family for like 10 plus years. It wasn't just bad the entire time. So there is like 10 plus years of positive interaction between Korra and Kuvira and the family. So you're meant to assume that basically prior to book 4 and her betrayal of them, she was actually close with basically everyone in that blossoming romance with Betar. The idea I think you're meant to take is ultimately that it started off rough between Opal and Kuvira, but that they did become fairly close as sisters, hence why Opal is so hurt by what's happened. And like, that's an okay jump to make. I just feel the book should have made some effort to show you any of that, and it would have immediately made everything feel a lot better. And I think they could have done this very simply with just something like a family picture of like Kuvira part of the Beifong family, and it just be happy. They've done that before. They used that quite a lot actually over the course of Korra to fill in a lot of background information, just a picture. The same thing I think should have been done here. That would have fixed everything. But we continue this scene. Korra says to Kuvira, but Betar made it very clear that once you two recreate Dr. Sheng's brainwashing device, he never wants to see you again. Wei and Wing kind of speak up here and are like, maybe we should take the full force of the Metal Clan and go after them. But Sue's like, no, we can't be seen as aggressors. We have to, we can't affect the Earth Kingdom democratic movement. Toph obviously speaks up and is like, what democratic movement? Everything's been brainwashed. Is it actually democracy anymore? Kuvira points out that like it's actually quite a brilliant plan what Guan has been able to do. And Opal, of course, uses this as an opportunity to speak up again. I bet you wish you had thought to brainwash everyone, then you would still be in power. And Kuvira's just like, that's not what I meant. And Sue really highlighting, like, again, for one of the first times, I think, just that she is the mother of both of them. That's enough, girls. We need to let the vote go forward and see how this plays out. Toph does say, don't get your hopes up, Sue. I pretty much forfeited that election the second we hightailed it out of Gaoling. Guan's got it in the bag. So, what's your thoughts on the remainder of this, I suppose, dinner scene up until Betar arrives?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's interesting just to see, I don't know, I like the idea that, they have this sort of like, family sort of dinner. I think it's something that we don't really, quite see in the Avatar world as much. So I guess, seeing this dynamic getting, it's a good way to get, people to talk who generally you would never ever see sort of like actually talk. Not that, still every character, actually gets a chance to voice everything, that they would say at these sort of moments. But, it's nice sort of to see in general. And, I don't know, it's always interesting to see, Toph in these sort of situations and her sort of like, sort of like nonchalant. I think this is interesting of her just, throughout the whole, course of this book. She's still her core sort of character at heart, even if she is a bit sort of wiser of things. So no, I think it's definitely a nice sort of way of seeing things.
Mm-hmm. So Betar basically just explains that if they can reverse the brainwashing, they can fix this, because once everyone's unbrainwashed, they'll realize that they were manipulated, and Guan's basically support will go complete 180, and that will allow Toph to win the election, and everything will be back to normal. So the Kuvira tries to talk to Betar at this point and says, I appreciate you agreeing to help, but again he just walks off and says we should get started. So he still doesn't really want to communicate much with Kuvira, but they have to work together to make this happen, because Kuvira has the information of seeing the brainwashing device and Betar has the technical knowledge. So I really like this. Like, there's not too many scenes in the book with Betar and Kuvira, but I actually like how they go about I wouldn't say they fix this dynamic by the end, but they definitely are sort of turning it into a little bit of a project, in that I think Betar and Kuvira's relationship is something that may be back on the table at some point going forward. And I like the progress across the scenes that they did in this book. But do you have any thoughts on this scene?
Yeah, no, I mean, they definitely, go about it in a way that it seems like they could at least be more, more friendly to each other by, sort of the end of the book. So it's interesting to see sort of where it starts off here with him, sort of basically giving her sort of the cold shoulder, even though he still has to work with her. So no, I think it's definitely a work in progress for sure.
Mm-hmm. Then we cut a little bit later on, and we have Korra trying to talk to Asami again. And she says that this nightmare may be over soon. She tries to touch Asami's hand, but Asami slaps it away and says, "Don't touch me." And Korra is very hurt by this, as Sue comes in and says that Betar is ready to, bring Asami in to do the brainwashing experimentation. What I'll say about these Korra and Asami scenes is that I understand what they're trying to do, but I really feel that they don't work. This is where the brainwashing plot, I think, is sort of almost like at its weakest, because they make it super clear that like every character knows that when a character is brainwashed, it is not them, and anything they say or do is not them. So there's only so much I can get from Korra looking at a brainwashed Asami and being sad, especially given how they go about doing the sort of like resolution to all of this. I just feel like it's not like worth having like 5 or 6 pages over the course of like 2 parts having Korra be sad about this just to have like a hug be the resolution at the end. So it's just like page count not used so much, because ultimately like Korra Asami doesn't get like any development in this book apart from just the 2 characters are on page and it's the main romance, so we have to have it here. What are your thoughts on what they do here?
Yeah, no, I think the whole idea with the memory resolution is probably why, for me at least, these don't work as much, because it all it's so one-sided as far as what's sort of happening. I mean, yeah, I could see how they could work it in later on, and it could be a point of contention later on. But the way that they at least played out in this book, doesn't really seem to be. Doesn't seem to really be worth it. And with Asami not really being even though she's just sort of like in these scenes, she's not sort of like trying to escape or flee or just saying a whole bunch of like random hurtful things. Like she did a little bit of that before, but since they've sort of brought her here and she's been under sort of house arrest, she hasn't really done anything. She hasn't tried to escape. She hasn't tried to sort of, be angry with anyone. She's just sort of, like zoned out there sort of in the scene. So I don't know. It definitely feels like they could have possibly done with it. I mean, I could see how these scenes could work if they would have, for me at least, gone about things differently with the resolution. But as it stands right now, they definitely, don't feel as impactful as they probably could.
Yeah, because like the worst thing that Asami did was say, "You're the enemy," to Korra. Like, she didn't even say anything like that bad to her. And I get the point they're trying to do here of like that because they're so close, anything that's very negative is going to hit Korra hard. But I think the other problem with this is just that it is the second Korra comic in a row where like Asami has sort of been taken out of the story for some reason, whether it be because she's been kidnapped by Tokuga or because she's been brainwashed, and it's Korra dealing with Asami not being around, when I think the far more interesting dynamic is the reverse of like how Asami would deal with something happened to Korra, which yes, we saw a little bit of that, I suppose, as they attempted to do the setup for this relationship in Korra, but now that they actually are confirmed in a relationship, I'd like to see Asami, the other dynamic, because Asami's the one who needs the development, not Korra really. But anyway, from here we get this sequence across a bunch of pages where basically Betar tries to do, they constantly increase the electromagnetic pulse intensity as they try to basically read reverse brainwashing to Asami. And what she says is, "You will no longer obey Commander Guan's orders. The Avatar is no longer your enemy. Your mind is yours again." and she just says, I'm only loyal to Commander Guan. And they continue to do this. Basically, they get across the idea that like the whole day passes, they're constantly changing the settings, Kuvira is constantly reading these reverse orders out, and it's just not working at all. And we get to nighttime at this point, and they just don't have no idea why it's not working. Kuvira then points out, what if you started with someone who hasn't been brainwashed yet? And Betar's like, yes. Using an autonomous subject would give me a proper baseline, and it could calibrate the settings from there. But there are some risks. Korra sits herself right down and is just like, yeah, I'll be the test subject. And everyone else is like, no. We can't mess with the Avatar's mind. No risk whatsoever. And so after they say this, Kuvira immediately volunteers. I'm going to do it. And even though the others are like, you don't have to go this far, like risk your mind for this. But she's like, no, I really have to do this. So she sits down, they get her kind of baseline brainwave, and they use this as the sort of trigger for the last Kuvira backstory that we get. And we also have, like, as she sits down, Betar noting for the first time here, maybe she's changed more than I thought. So, he's beginning to open up after interacting with her a little bit more. Earlier on, we have like little moments of like Kuvira praising Betar for making the machine almost identically, Betar praising Kuvira for her like excellent memory and description. So their chemistry is like slowly beginning to come back, of just kind of like they've done over the course of this book. It's like it just takes the characters like interacting with this different Kuvira to open up to her that little bit more. But before we get into the flashback, what are your thoughts on this whole sequence here as they start to investigate the brainwashing and reversing it?
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting sequence just because of how, they're trying to show sort of how, I guess sort of hopeless this is, at least, with the current knowledge that they have of, how the machine works or how they think it's going to work, in order to sort of, reverse engineer the brainwashing that, they thought they could pretty much sort of do. So I think it's definitely cool just to see, these characters interact, to see, Betar, we know from him, during the series, just sort of his technical advancements that he has. So it's cool to see him sort of, have, more so to actually sort of do. It's interesting just to get to see, him in, more of the forefront, since he's usually, even if he is always sort of there and has like sort of a big role, it's usually more behind the scenes. So it's cool to see his interactions up front for once.
Mm-hmm. And then just very notably, like, Kuvira is taking a risk doing this. They do imply that like they could, in just getting her brainwave, alter her in some way. So, this is one of the big things she puts herself on the line for, to help others and show her change. But we'll get into the flashback now. So obviously at this point, where we left off the flashback, Kuvira had just arrived at Zaofu. She had just met Su, had just been dropped off by her parents, so she's now part of the family, but it's still relatively early on. So Kuvira walks into Opal's room and says, "Get out, Opal, it's my turn." And Opal says, "You get out, this is my room and my dollhouse." Kuvira says, "Fine, if I can't play with it, then neither can you," as she uses metal bending to crush the metal dollhouse, and this causes Opal to obviously scream for her mother. Sue walks right in and says, "What is going on in here, girls?" And she immediately goes to Kuvira, "Why did you do this, Kuvira?" And she says, "I don't know." Sue says, "If you don't learn to control your violent impulses, you're going to hurt someone in this family, the way you hurt your mother. Do you understand? You can't tell me what to do." And as she walks out, Opal says, "Aren't you going to punish her, Mom?" But Sue just says, "We have to cut her some slack, honey. Your sister's been through a lot." And Opal says, "She's not my sister. She's a stray dog no one ever wanted, not even her real parents." As we see Kuvira change from a very defiant, angry, doesn't really know what she's doing, to very sad at hearing this statement said by Opal. It's obviously very harsh from a young Opal, but after what Kuvira just did, you sort of get where it comes from. And once again, that's it. It's just a very quick 2-page flashback, just like all the other parts. It was just 2 pages per book, and you're left to try and interpret a very small amount of information in a sort of big way. What's your take on what we're meant to take from this part of the flashback?
I mean, I do like it, so I will say that for sure. I think it's definitely cool to see this, and the whole sort of memory, sort of brain sort of testing to get the machine work. It's a nice plot device in order to make her sort of rethink about things. So that part I think is kind of cool. But overall, my take from it, I don't know, it's interesting. I mean, it definitely shows that they have had past interactions and that they've had it for quite a long time. It actually shows I guess sort of a frame of reference for sort of their ages, at least a little bit at a time. So that's interesting to note, which I've seen other people mention as well. So that's interesting, and just to sort of, I don't know, get a bit of information on sort of what could be possibly the final straw that actually got Kuvira sort of removed from her home here, I think is interesting to note as well. So I don't know, it's interesting just to see. I guess these are like very sort of like early interactions that they're having here. I don't know, it seems kind of sort of brazen for Kuvira to do this at such a sort of like a young age in general. So obviously there's a lot of things that she's had to work on in order to become, I guess, sort of the better person that we initially thought she was, or that she might be eventually going back into. So there's definitely a lot here, but they still leave quite a lot open as well, which maybe would have been nice to have another scene to sort of counteract or sort of balance out this one. So this is like sort of like the bad flashback, and there would be sort of like the good flashback, or like you said before with the picture or whatever. I mean they do have like a nice scene at the end of the book, so that is sort of like appreciated, but it doesn't quite give you as much sort of history as you might sort of think that you would want from sort of this part here. And I don't know, maybe that's something that they couldn't quite sort of fit in, but I don't know, it's definitely a good scene to have at this point for sure.
Yeah, like obviously the main takeaway is Sue basically saying you need to control your violent impulses, that it is Sue's opinion that like this is an actual sort of like mental issue that Kuvira has, that she has violent impulses that she doesn't know how to control. Hence why like Kuvira's response to a lot of this stuff is like, I don't know, like why did you just suddenly break that thing after just a very minor argument? And she doesn't really know her feelings exactly why she did that. And then this is probably the one that I'm kind of most like, why did they not show this? Like, of all the flashback that they decided to show, why was this something they just decided to tell us rather than show us? The way you hurt your mother. And then I'll skip ahead a little bit just to give the full context for this scene. But Kuvira explains this later on. She says, I want to forget how I lost my temper and nearly killed my own mother. So this adds a lot of context to the whole discussion around Kuvira's parents and like what way we're meant to view them. Because Kuvira's big sympathetic thing from book 4 was that she was given away by her parents. Her parents abandoned her, quote unquote. And this flashback has given us a different sort of interpretation of that, in that, yes, maybe her parents were maybe not the best, but also that a good amount of this was also Kuvira's own actions and behavior herself. Not like that it was her own fault to a degree as well as her parents. And that, there's something to be said for the fact that her parents made sure that Kuvira was, given over to someone who could control her and handle her. And then just from the scenes we see of Kuvira, it's clear that over the years, being part of the Beifong family cures Kuvira of these violent impulses, in that I would describe book 3 Kuvira when we meet her as like a fairly calm and composed character, which is like the exact opposite of Kuvira we see in these flashbacks. So she changes and grows by being part of the family, and that's a positive. She finally has people who kind of care for her and can handle her issues and stuff like that. It's just very confusing about like, why are they showing this flashback and not that flashback, and only telling us about that one and then never showing us a positive one. It's a very confusing thing in regards to like, how did they write this book in this way is probably the main takeaway that I have. But what are your thoughts on that big reveal there, that Kuvira nearly killed her mother? And that was like, I take that as being like, that was the final straw that caused her parents to kind of have to give her away.
Yeah, no, I definitely take that as like a big moment. That's something that you would expand upon at least a little bit more, since it seems like, it's enough that it's worth for you to actually sort of say here, then it seems like it's worth for you to actually sort of tell a bit more about it, even if it wasn't sort of like, a super like sort of like intentional thing on her being sort of like a young sort of bender or something like that. Like it could have just been her sort of like, her powers sort of getting out of hand with, her being angry at the same moment. So I don't know. I can't, it depends on like how you're sort of viewing it, how serious a effect. I mean, just the fact that it even sort of happened is pretty big on its own. But it seems like there's a lot more to it, and I don't know. I mean, I guess the idea of this flashback versus possibly that flashback is this one is with the Beifongs is with the family, which is sort of when they're sort of when we're sort of mentioning all the issues that Opal's sort of having with Kuvira. It seems this seems like it would be sort of appropriate one to sort of include in that sort of regard. But mentioning that seems like you should have included more information on it. So I don't know. It's definitely it makes sense to be there. It just seems like there's more that's there to unpack.
Yeah, like the main takeaway for like the overall story that I do take from this flashback is ultimately that Kuvira remembers a moment of Sue sort of standing up for her in a way that Sue basically defends Kuvira in this sort of flashback, and it's the idea of like Sue has helped Kuvira greatly over the course of her life when her parents didn't and just gave her up, and that what changed her from being this stray dog no one ever wanted was Sue took her in, and eventually the whole family did get behind her and began to see her as part of the family. And she gradually begins to remember that being part of this family was like the best thing that ever happened to her. I think that's the main takeaway from this. It's one of those things where like I get why they have the scene with Opal here, but like it seems like blatantly contradictory to like what they eventually end up doing with Opal, and it's just missing a scene highlighting their actual dynamic as opposed to like one incident basically. So we come into the flashback. Kuvira is all right. Betar has exactly what he needs. They bring Asami back in. They do the exact same thing again. You'll no longer obey the orders. The Avatar is no longer your enemy. Your mind is yours again. And it works this time. And here is this reunion that we were talking about earlier on. So we get Asami saying, Korra. And then Korra just says, I'm so sorry you had to go through all that. What do you remember? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They hug. And Korra just says, it's all right. You're back now. I've got you. Obviously, they're interrupted at this point. This is when they find out about, oh yeah, the election has already taken place. Guan has basically won. We've completely been taken by surprise here. But that's the reunion. Like, pretty much like half a book of like setup in a way for like the importance of Asami being brainwashed and then bringing her back is just this. There is another scene later on that's probably better than I think this one, but in terms of just the sort of impact of Asami being unbrainwashed, I'm just like, yes, let's move on. Like it doesn't hit for me that much, and I'm not sure if it's meant to even. But what are your thoughts on this? The brainwashing being undone after Kuvira's help.
Yeah, no, I think I don't know. It definitely, I don't know. With it being so short and so sort of like almost nonchalant, it almost seems like that was like super intentional for it to not sort of have any sort of like, I guess at least sort of like initially any sort of bearing. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting that they chose just, there's so many different ways you can go about brainwashing and sort of like undoing it, as far as like, memory, not having some memory, having partial memory, having that memory sort of like come back over time, and having the characters sort of like deal with all the bad things that they, potentially have done before. So I don't know. It's interesting to see that they chose this sort of route. I mean, it almost sort of like clean slates it sort of, because Korra still remembers everything, and anyone else who interacted with Sami sort of can remember what their sort of like interactions were here. But in the grand scheme of what we've at least seen so far, it doesn't seem like Asami really did that sort of much. to sort of, make things be sort of like the worst in the world, which I guess is probably sort of a positive. You don't want them to be sort of so sort of scarred here. But as far as sort of like, what we're sort of talking about as far as like character development and sort of like their relationship in general, it doesn't seem to push things as much forward. I mean, it definitely, initially, of course, it always makes you sort of rebound and be a bit sort of closer. So we'll see. I guess this will be something that's definitely a longer term thing to see if there's any more sort of repercussions from this whole sort of incident here. But at least initially, it doesn't seem like there's quite as much.
Yeah, and it's just like, okay, Asami doesn't remember basically a full day. That's fairly bad. But she didn't do, like, anything. Like, she said, like, 2 things to Korra. And Korra knows it wasn't her. They had, like, a minor fight that, like, nothing happened in. Again, Korra was able to just get the advantage immediately, and they pretty simply captured her. Even the brothers, like, didn't do anything. They're meant to be, like, Guan's big, go-to henchmen, but, like, as powerful as they are, they don't get to do anything. And, like, the worst thing that happened with brainwashing was that, like, Bolin hit Opal in the shoulder, but then it's like this book forgets that even happened. That it's just a complete non-event. So, that's where, like, I maintain they probably should have done the brainwashing in reverse. Just have Korra get brainwashed and have the others have to team up with Kuvira to get Korra back. That way, you have the immediate impact of, like, it's a really bad thing that the Avatar has been brainwashed, and so there's just an impact to the fact that they've, returned the Avatar to her rightful mind, and then the others directly get to see Kuvira helping them get Korra back. That, to me, is better. That way you have the characters who need the development active, and Korra, who doesn't need the development, is out of a book by being brainwashed. But they went down the path they went on, as much as I sort of disagree with it. The next scene is that Julie, of course, President Moon, rings up and is like, what's going on in Gaoling? What was Wu doing? Of course, Korra has to inform her out of nowhere that, like, oh yeah, Commander Guan's doing brainwashing stuff, and, like, it's a big, shock. Like, Julie's like, what? Over the phone. And basically, Julie decides that we have to be very careful about this, so we have to sit back for a while, and one thing that we have to do is bring Kuvira back. She's too much of a sort of, so stuff could go wrong if Kuvira is left out there in the middle of the open, so bring her back and we'll try and figure things out from here. Korra's forced to agree, and Kuvira's just like, so the president wants to lock me back up. We'll leave first thing in the morning. So Kuvira goes over to Betar and says, I guess you're getting your wish. You'll never have to see me again. He just says, have a safe trip back. She then opens up and says, it broke my heart when I had to choose the Earth Empire over a life with you. I realize I can never repair our relationship or make up for all the pain I caused you, but I want you to know I truly did love you. And it's a really interesting expression from Betar. He doesn't answer immediately, but he does then say, it was nice working with you again, Kuvira. I think the main interpretation I have is that he treats what she said here as actually being sincere, in that he doesn't immediately try to sort of deny what she says. So this is a big moment, because this is obviously the main question. Did she ever care about Betar? Did she feel the same way? And ultimately, the answer here is yes, but at the time she did choose her ambitions, the Earth Empire, over him, but that she did love him. And I think that was a big moment to have, and for Kuvira at this point, it's a big moment to, I think, say that. And this is definitely a scene where it's like, okay, there's still some time to go, it'll take some work, but there's hope for that relationship, I think, as we go forward. But what are your thoughts on this sequence?
I think it's definitely sort of one of the bigger sort of moments in the book for sure, just as far as their sort of, relationship and their sort of character dynamic here. Definitely, it seems at least, from what we've all been saying, that it does seem like she did really sort of care, because that was we were really sort of questioning that sort of like at all, like is this just sort of like a farce of a relationship in general, just to sort of get things moving along. So I don't know, it's interesting to see it's interesting to see after Kuvira, her character, just her general character from what we've seen from the show. It's interesting to see her in these more sort of like calmer sort of moments compared to everything that we've seen before. So it's definitely, I don't know, I found it quite interesting to see how this works, and I don't know if they'll ever sort of try to do something with their sort of relationship in the future. I mean, I guess with everything that happens, they'll be in the same sort of location. I mean, I don't know, it wouldn't really bother me if they don't get sort of back together at all or anything sort of like that. I think if they even become just sort of like normal friends or anything like that, I think that would be sort of like an improvement on everything that sort of happened in the past. It's something that I guess we'll really have to sort of play out.
Mm-hmm. So next we cut over to another Korra and Asami scene. I suppose for most people the main takeaway from this scene is just that, like, oh, Korra and Asami share a bed. Like that was like the main reaction online that I saw, more so than actual interpretation of the scene itself. So Asami says, I can't get over what happened. It's so strange not being able to remember whole days of my life. Did I say or do anything I might have regretted? And they show a panel, no text bubble, of just Korra looking at Asami as if like, you did, but I don't want to tell you what you did or did not say. And she just says, what you might have said, it doesn't matter now. I know it wasn't you talking. Asami says, still, but they just hug, and Korra says, let's just put that all behind us, okay? And that, like, okay, nice hug, and they're back together, it's fine. But, like, they're trying to get across that, like, Korra was, like, truly hurt by something Asami said, when nothing Asami said was that bad. Like I said, like, it was literally just the fact that Asami said you're my enemy to her, and that was really it. So I think they're just trying to make a little bit too much out of something that really doesn't mean that much. It would be different if they had made this more personal, that under the brainwashing, like, Asami had said something a little bit more, like, personal about Korra, that Korra was unsure, like, wait, is that brainwashing, or is that, like, some deep truth that, like, Asami might feel actually about Korra, but could be something like one of her enemies would think about her. It wasn't anything like that, though. So that's why a scene like this doesn't mean all that much. But like, I suppose, what are your thoughts on this scene before we get into the plot from here?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that definitely goes in line with it. It definitely seems like they're trying to sort of play things up, and I don't know, maybe just because it's just a stressor in general on their relationship that sort of caused a temporary rift, and Asami obviously feels really bad about it and not being able to sort of remember anything that has sort of happened here. I mean, I don't know. I wonder if there's more going to come out of this than we have actually sort of seen. I mean, then this whole sort of issue here might make more sense than what it currently does. But yeah, like you said, from what we've seen at least, or been shown, it doesn't seem like anything specifically that bad happened. So I don't know. I really sort of wonder what's going on.
I suppose the question on this is, do you think in the next comic, or any Korra comic going forward, will they ever mention the fact that Asami, Mako, and Bolin have been brainwashed, and any sort of takeaway notable thing from it?
I don't know. That would be pretty cool if they did do that. Just because of being under control, even if it was such a short period of time, they could have said something, or Asami with her technical background could have shared something, or there could have been something else that could have been said. So I mean, that's something that, like, I could see playing out and actually being like a somewhat interesting sort of plot point if it did happen. It just seems like, I don't know, with the timing of everything that we're sort of breaking things down, it doesn't seem like there was quite that much time for things to happen. I don't know. It's hard to get a read on sort of the passage of time sometimes, and what could have been said in between things.
So yeah, Sue comes in and basically says, did you know what Kuvira was planning? And she has to reveal that, there was the guards outside her door were unconscious. She's gone. She stole one of the planes and has fled Zhao Fu. So this, I think, is what they were maybe trying to get at the whole idea of like the marketing tagline of this book of like Kuvira's true nature revealed, and them trying to tease this like, oh, she's actually gone bad, even though like no one who's actually read the book believes she's going to turn. So I really actually like how this next scene goes, in that most of the characters also don't think that Kuvira's just gone rogue again. So she must have been waiting for just the right moment to escape. She played us all. But Korra says, I don't think so. It's thanks to her that you're free. In Gaoling, she warned me that Guan brainwashed you, and she even volunteered to be tested on so you could get your mind back. And Asami's like, she did. And then Sue says, Korra, do you have any idea where Kuvira might be heading? She was pretty livid when Guan refused to surrender to her. My bet, Kuvira decided not to wait around for the diplomatic process to play out, which means there's only one place she could be going, back to Gaoling. So I actually really like that scene. Like this is like probably in a way, your main plot reason for why Korra is almost like a key character in this book. It's because you need her there for this moment as like the character who understands Kuvira the most, because they're very similar. That's what Korra would do in a situation like this. This is I suppose basically like Kuvira's version of like Korra going after Tarlok back in book 1. And it's because they're such similar characters, and I like that it's Korra standing up for Kuvira after something bad happened, and Sue ultimately sort of agreeing and going along with it, and also believing in Kuvira at this point. I suppose, what were your thoughts on that? How they do this sort of sudden reveal that she's left, and the explanation afterwards?
Yeah, no, I think that definitely, everything sort of fits in line with, sort of Kuvira / Korra sort of character, sort of, just, eventually wanting to take action when things aren't sort of moving in the direction that they see is sort of the best thing. I mean, this definitely is something that early Korra would have done. And, Kuvira at this point, it seems like she's trying to sort of like, fix all the issues that she's sort of caused before. So she even has more of a stake in it to sort of, undo her own sort of wrongs in the past. So this is just her sort of like really just sort of taking action after everything, even if it isn't, necessarily the best way about going about things.
So we cut over to, I suppose, the mayor's office, where obviously Guan has sort of taken over. The previous guy has been taken out, and it's revealed that, Kuvira's been hiding behind the door. So she confronts Commander Guan, and they have a discussion here. He's like, okay, have you come to try and stop me again? And she says, no, on the contrary, I commend you on the resurrecting of the Earth Empire. You've always been a shrewd leader. I'm here to propose a deal that will benefit us both. What do you have in mind? And here's what she says. I've thought a lot about what you said. Why should others reap the benefits of what we worked so hard to accomplish? In my quest for power, I've alienated everyone I've considered family. It's clear to me now that no matter what I do, things can never go back to the way they were. So I've decided to follow the only path left for me to... I've decided the only path left for me to follow is yours. You want to rejoin the Earth Empire. And she says, on one condition. I suppose I'll stop it there at this point, because I think it's important to have full context for this scene, in that obviously she is lying to him. She's just trying to lure him into a situation where she can turn the tables. So it is interesting about how much of what she says you are meant to believe as being truthful Kuvira talking about herself, and how much of it is just a lie to engineer the situation that she wants. So I suppose just in this early section, what are your thoughts on this, and how much of what she says over the course of these pages we're meant to believe and not believe?
That's a good one. I think a lot of it, I think, is sort of her sort of underlying sort of feelings about, the situations that she's currently been put in. I mean, obviously some of it isn't true, because she's still trying to sort of get the upper hand on him, as we see later on. But I think, with what she says here and what she continues to say later on, I think it definitely, I think it's her, finally sort of taking the time to sort of reflect on things and what she's sort of actually done. I don't think, earlier Kuvira would have even bothered to sort of, take a stance on, sort of things that has happened before and how things have sort of, not gone her way. She would have just sort of, straightforward, just sort of seen, the end result goal and just sort of gone for it without sort of any thinking about any sort of repercussions.
Yeah, like the main thing for this first one that I read out there is just like, I've alienated everyone I've considered family. I think, yeah, that's her sort of being truthful about it. That's what she's experienced over the course of this book. But her sort of solution to that, what she says next, that it's clear to me no matter how or what I do, things can never go back to the way they were. Like, I think she maybe partly believes that, and like depending on how her punishment goes. But I also think, she maybe thinks there's hope now after like what just happened with Betar. She's sort of already improved things with Sue, so that's a little bit of a lie. But we'll continue on with the scene. So Guan thinks that her one condition is that she wants to be the leader. And he's like, no, I'm in charge of the Earth Empire now. And she just says, I assure you I have no intention of challenging your authority. What do you want? And she says, I want to forget. I want to forget how I lost my temper and nearly killed my own mother. I want to forget the Beifongs and my life in Zhaofu, all those painful memories. But most of all, I want to wipe away the memory of all those I've hurt. I believe you have that technology that can help me with that. This is an interesting one to discuss. This is probably the main one, actually, in terms of like, okay, what of what she's saying here is true, what isn't. The whole nearly killing her mother thing is true because it links into the flashback, and we were told that she hurt her mother. We know she has like feelings about, living with the Beifongs and that they are painful to a degree. But the whole forgetting aspect of this, she references this in like her final speech at the end of the book. But she says like the opposite. I think this is sort of her being truthful, but again, the forgetting is just to engineer needing to get brainwashed, basically. But what are your thoughts on this kind of back and forth here?
Yeah, she doesn't seem like the character that would want to sort of like forget things in that sort of way. She may, wish things that went a sort of a different way, or that they could have been sort of altered or something like that, but it doesn't, I don't know, from what we've seen of her character, at least from the way that I take it, it doesn't seem like that's something that she would necessarily sort of go back on. It seems like she's definitely more of a, go for it type of person. So that part I think is definitely sort of part of the play. But yeah, it is interesting to see that, how this, could all work in some sort of way towards, what she's trying to go for, and the whole idea of the brainwashing and the memory loss. So I think it's definitely a good way of, trying to get him, to sort of understand what she's done, even though he can even see sort of like the issues with, the logic of what she's saying.
Yeah, and the other thing is like you can almost like interpret like forget as like being the word that almost like defines her not taking responsibility for her actions, that she's always just moved past them as if she's forgot it. That like, I suppose in a way in this scene, her even saying I nearly killed my own mother is her beginning to like take that responsibility of like, I did that in the past. That is why, in a way, what happened with my parents happened. I am responsibility for the relationship with the Beifongs being the way they are. I see that now. And yeah, it's just we see her wanting to improve that at the end of the book, but her saying that she wants to forget it here to get Guan to brainwash her. But he says, yes, the process would also put you under my complete control. I can't believe you'd yield willingly. And she just says, this wouldn't be the first time I surrendered. And besides, we both know you wouldn't allow me back without brainwashing me. It's the only way you'll be able to fully trust me. And he just says, true. She says, this way we'll both get what we want. You'll have my complete compliance and I'll have a guilt-free conscience. So do we have a deal? Yes, I suppose is basically the idea. So, this makes sense because Guan, was it the end of part 1 or at some point in part 2, the two of them, Dr. Shang and Guan, discussed the idea of like, it would be really great if we had Kuvira on our side but brainwashed. So he wants this, like, and she sort of knows that this is something that they want, because I suppose, she was the previous leader. There was something about her that he admired and he could acknowledge how powerful she is. This would be perfect in the same way that he got like Mako and Bolin on his side. A brainwashed Kuvira would be perfect. So he wants that ambition, but she's obviously playing this situation to get a one-on-one basically with her, Dr. Shang and Guan. So I quite like the kind of how she engineers this situation. But what are your thoughts on the last couple of pages of this sequence?
Yeah, no, she's definitely is good at engineering various sort of situations that work towards her advantage. And this is, one of those scenes again. I mean, he, even when she just comes in the room to begin with, he notes her sort of like cunning ability that she always has, which is probably why he's on guard with everything that sort of happens later on. So no, I think it's definitely a good way of sort of setting up this whole sort of issue here, and that, having her on their side, either, without the brainwashing, if, that would be the best case scenario, but with everything that's sort of happened, to really sort of trust her, you really have to have her sort of like fully under your control, and they just happen to have the ability to do that right now.
So we cut then up on top of Opal's bison Juicy here. We have Opal, of course, flying Juicy. We have Asami, Korra, Toph, and Su Yin. They're searching for, obviously, the plane that Kuvira took to find where she is. They spot the plane, and they're like, oh, but where is Kuvira? And Opal says at this point, just admit it, Mom. Kuvira took advantage of your goodwill and betrayed you again. Sue says, we don't know that for sure. Until I learn otherwise, I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt. And Opal just, like before, she's seen this happen before, just like you've always done. So they're going over the city to see if they can try and find her. And I like that scene. I really like that they're showing that Sue has gotten over her sort of anger towards Kuvira from the end of book 4 and the start of this series, and is now back to, I suppose, her usual trait of she's always willing to give people a second chance. She got her second chance, and that's how she was able to form Zhao Fu and all this sort of stuff, by turning her life around after the whole Terra Triad incident with Lin and so on. And so she always gives everyone else a second chance. That's most of her staff in Zhao Fu and in her home. She gave Varric a second chance and so on. I like that she's giving Kuvira that second chance, that it's just taken, basically Korra explaining Kuvira's actions, and she's willing to give her that chance, even though Opal disagrees. I still feel like it's a little odd that they're placing Opal in this very negative position and ultimately never do anything to show personally with Opal why she should turn around on her. I feel it was just they probably just didn't have time for that. That was maybe the page they had to cut or something. But what are your thoughts on this scene up on Juicy?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is interesting. Sue definitely is back to her sort of second chance ways, as you mentioned here, which she does seem to do a lot. I mean, I guess the whole idea with Kuvira's general is just, she's just a lot of second chances. So maybe from that perspective, Opal is you've already given her enough sort of chances. She doesn't really need any more here. But it definitely does seem, like you mentioned, that Opal is being, more so unforgiving than we would typically think of her character sort of being. But no, obviously there seems like there's something there that we're not sort of privy to. So maybe that's sort of the idea behind that. But otherwise, I think it's interesting. It's just a good way of seeing, the current dynamic of everyone and how they feel about the character.
Because from one perspective, just the obvious question of if Sue is willing to sort of give Kuvira a chance, why isn't Opal? Shouldn't Sue, as the mother who took her in, be the one who's more annoyed? Why is Opal this way? Because Opal is one of the nicest characters in the entire series. That's one of the traits you'd associate with her. So it is unusual to see Opal just be outwardly just aggressively, snippy towards a character like this. It really is almost against her character. So it just feels like some of the motivations maybe here are not quite lost, in that she betrayed the whole family. And I get it, Huan is never going to be the most developed of the Beifong characters. Wei and Wing, by virtue of being twins, they're never really going to be the most focused on. So it has to be basically Sue and Opal as the main ones who kind of have issues with her. why is it Opal, in a way? Like, that's where we needed more information to inform us, and I don't quite think that one flashback moment is enough, because that was clearly very early on, and it completely ignores, like, 10, 15 years after it. So, we'll move on. We'll have more to discuss towards the end. So, we cut to Kuvira now in the brainwashing machine. It's basically ready to happen at this point, but immediately we see that she's spotted some other brainwashing devices. She begins to metal bend them, and then she sticks them on Dr. Shang and Guan's head, crushes them, and breaks out and begins to take advantage. She says, "I'm beating you at your own game. When we're finished here, you will have no choice but to finally surrender and tell the whole world how you stole the election." And Dr. Shang is like, "You can't brainwash us. You don't even know how this machine operates." And she's like, "Actually, I do, thanks to Betar. He figured out how your little contraption works, and it only took him a few hours." So, Betar's not even there, but she's still praising him, so that's a interesting little note. But Mako and Bolin, of course, arrive at this point and are like, "Release them at once." She doesn't want to fight them because, she knows they're on her side at this point. Guan thinks he's kind of won now because these two are here. So she's forced to sort of retreat outside because, Mako and Bolin, together especially, is a really amazing combination. In terms of the bending, they don't really show it as being that impressive here, but you understand why even someone like Kuvira would potentially have to retreat from Mako and Bolin. So as she runs outside, this is when Sue on top of Juicy spots Kuvira, so they immediately head down to get involved in the action. Juicy lands. Korra just immediately handles Mako and Bolin by just airbending them in place for ever, basically. It seems like they don't really kind of cut back to it that much. Opal gets off and takes out some of the Earth Empire guards. Su Yin takes some of them down, Toph does it, and we get the note here. That's what happens when you mess with 3 generations of Bei Fongs, as that's exactly what we saw happen. Dr. Shang runs out trying to escape and is confronted by Asami. She gets her revenge on Dr. Shang by shocking her right in the chest, saying, "This is for zapping my brain," so that's a nice Asami moment. And then, of course, we get the main confrontation here. Kuvira chases Guan. He tries to escape in one of the cars, but she metal bends it into the ground, and they basically have a pretty cool metal bending fight here. He fires kind of some of his shoulder armor. She deflects it. She turns it into a whip. He then uses normal earth bending, hits her in the shoulder. He then seemingly moves in to finish Kuvira off by throwing the car at her, but she just carves it in half and then pins him up against the wall with metal bending. She's won this fight. And we'll get to the plot stuff in a second, but what are your thoughts on the way the action breaks down here in this sequence?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely pretty cool just to see, the two of them go up against each other here. I mean, I don't know, for some reason, I guess you don't really get, sort of the idea, the strength behind Guan, but I guess you get to see a little bit here of what he can sort of actually do. Still not on par with Kuvira, of course, just because of, the characters and just, I guess, their abilities in general here. But no, it's interesting to see that he does have, some fight in him, as you would expect of someone who is, at least was leading, part of her forces here. So it's just interesting to note that, and just to see, the whole group of them sort of get into this, sort of action scene here. This is, the big moment of the comic where everything sort of comes to pass and everything is sort of happening. So, it's always cool to see, our group sort of in a sort of big battle here, and to see them all sort of working, mostly sort of coordinating together and stuff.
Yeah, I think in this battle, the only thing I don't like is that Korra just does one move and Mako and Bolin are out of the fight. I think in terms of power levels, that is not correct in my mind. Korra's good, but she shouldn't be able to do just Mako and Bolin one airbending move and they're kind of out of the fight for good like that. And I think it's a missed opportunity as well, because Korra having to fight those two seriously could have been a huge moment in the comic, because they're teammates. These are 3 of the more powerful benders, because Korra we always view as being one of the better kind of avatars in terms of her physical abilities. Mako is praised by Amon as being one of the most powerful benders, and then we know Bolin is one of the most powerful benders because he can lava bend. That would be an incredible fight to see Korra have to seriously go up against the brothers, just to see how she'd handle them in an actual fight. And it felt like this is the prime example of them not having the time to do this, and in my mind kind of just making a little bit of a joke out of the seriousness of the moment by just having Korra immediately handle them. Because that could have been your serious takeaway from the brainwashing, like a really big fight. In terms of like, I think any other setup we would have got that fight, but we didn't quite get it here. But yeah, Guan versus Kuvira, I actually liked how that was done. He's still very skilled, but Kuvira is like arguably like one of the best metal and earthbenders we've ever seen. So you understand how she takes one hit, but then immediately gets serious and just ends the fight like that. So the big moment we get here is Kuvira walks over to the pinned Guan with a giant jagged bit of metal, about to kill him. He's screaming, "I surrender," but she says, "It's too late for that. I'm making sure you never rise again." Sue says for Kuvira to stop, that killing Guan won't solve anything. It won't bring you any peace. And I really like the shift in expression here as she goes from sort of determined about to kill to like thinking about everything, calming down immediately. You're right. And she puts the medal down, but she does say, Make no mistake, Commander Guan, you're finished and the Earth Empire is over for good." And he's forced to order everyone to surrender. Everyone stand down, and that is the incident over. I know some people have been criticizing this for just how quickly it all comes to an end in like 10 pages. Kuvira flips the switch, everyone lands, fight happens, he's forced to surrender, and it's over. But that is how you resolve this situation, basically. Like, they obviously had to go against Julie's orders because of what Kuvira did, but it ended things very, very quickly because Guan, as clever as some of what he did was, ultimately didn't have the will, wasn't as good of a leader as Kuvira could be. And so they highlight here that, he's kind of been making fun of Kuvira, like, in all of their interactions for surrendering, yet he surrenders in a much easier way than she does, just highlighting the difference between the two of them. So I'm actually perfectly fine with this. I think they took Guan as far as they could as a villain, and I'll definitely say he was solid as that kind of fill-in, second-in-command, taking over the remnants of the Earth Empire. I thought he was used very well. But what are your thoughts on the main conflict being over as of this page here?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose he wasn't really, he was never really sort of played out as sort of like a top tier sort of villain. He sort of just had sort of like enough forces behind him and enough sort of, I guess, previous sort of momentum, and he had sort of like one key element that sort of, made it enough that he could, gain some sort of momentum. Like he wouldn't be the type of character that could take on like the whole Earth Kingdom or the whole, Republic United Forces or anything like that. He sort of was sort of limited in, I guess, sort of his scope of what he could actually sort of achieve and had ambitions for. He really didn't have that much time to sort of develop things and move things forward. So I guess they really are sort of just trying to show that sort of like he really just sort of isn't quite on the same level as what Kuvira used to be here. But overall, I think it's interesting just to sort of how they chose about going to end this, and sort of seeing the reactions from Kuvira and sort of her, how they go from her being almost sort of like dark, menacing, willing to sort of kill him, to sort of really sort of reflecting on her sort of like past sort of ambitions and whatnot. So I think it's really interesting how they show the emotion on her face. I think that's probably the one of the things that we see the most with her character in general, at least that I noticed, just sort of like the seriousness of her character to sort of it being sort of calming down. I think they do a really good job of that in the show and in the comics as well.
Yeah, like another interpretation of this scene is that obviously like linking into the flashback is like, here's like the return of Kuvira's like violent impulses, but it's the person who helped her get past those impulses, Sue, telling her to calm down once again, and her agreeing to it because she's gotten past that, and now it flares up again. Sue is there to help her and give her that, context to this won't help you. And it gives you a sense for potentially like how Sue went about dealing with those problems that Kuvira had when she was younger, of like something like this but in more minor situations, of like if you disagree with Opal, you don't need to break something, you can talk about it, you can say something different, and so on. So I like that there's little connections and so on. But we move into the resolution here, kind of quickly wrapping things up. So immediately we go into the room, we unbrainwash Mako, Bolin, and Wu, and we just get the kind of standard stuff here. Opal hugs Bolin, of course, because they're dating, and then Wu hugs Mako because they're friends. And it's just, Bolin, you're okay, and Wu says, my brain is back. And it's just one page, we have to show them being unbrainwashed. That's it. They didn't even bring up the, Bolin hit Opal on the shoulder or anything. That was it. Do you have any thoughts on this quick resolution here?
No, not really. I mean, I guess there's not much to it really, since nothing really overly happened. I mean, I don't know. It'd be interesting if, the whole thing with Opal and Bolin does come up later on. I think that's probably more so of an issue potentially than anything that we've seen before. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Then we cut back to Gao Ling, and so the mayor, of course, who we obviously had met before, he says, I can't thank you enough, Avatar Korra. Without your help, Gao Ling and its citizens would continue to be under Commander Guan's control. And she has to say, you really should be thanking Kuvira. If she hadn't taken matters into her own hands, Guan would still be in power. But this doesn't mean you're off the hook. I've made orders to take you back to Republic City. Kuvira just says, I know. The mayor says, considering everything that's happened, should we plan to move forward with the election as originally scheduled? And we see that Wu is thinking about this seriously, and as we see, it's not going to quite go ahead like that. It's not going to take place in a few days or in a week, and we'll see his speech here. But I do like in this scene that Korra gets that moment to really, highlight to both the readers as well as the other characters that, like, okay, I'm getting the praise for this because I'm the Avatar, but like Kuvira really did do like all of it basically. Like she was essential to the brainwashing even being able to be reversed in the first place, and then her actions, even though I suppose she technically like broke free of her, supervision, did end things without it taking weeks and who knows how long and so on. That it was all Kuvira. Like, yes, Korra helped, Asami helped, but it was all Kuvira. That it's Kuvira's book, and while it ultimately is a little bit of a criticism over the whole book that like Korra, Asami, Mako, Bolin have very little to do, it is all about Kuvira here, and she did do stuff. So that's the main takeaway for me from that page. But do you have any thoughts on that scene with the mayor?
Yeah, no, they definitely are trying to get that across, and I think even later on they they make more mention of just sort of Kuvira and just sort of her support for at least attempting the sort of undoing the wrongs that she sort of caused here. So I don't know, I think it's cool, and of course Korra would be the character that would be easiest to sort of admit when other people are sort of helping her out in situations now at least.
Mm-hmm. So Wu gives a speech here. It has been a trying week for all of us, and I can't help but feel responsible. I was so eager for change that I pressed ahead with the election despite the objections. Upon reconsideration, I have decided to alter the Earth Kingdom's path towards democracy. Each state will come up with its own timetable for elections according to the wishes of its citizens. I refuse to force my will upon the people the way Commander Guan forced his will upon me, and so many of you. The United Republic took decades to elect its first president. Expecting the rest of the Earth Kingdom to become a democracy overnight wasn't realistic. I understand that now. I'm still committed to transforming the kingdom so that its governments represent everyone, but until that time comes, I will continue to serve as your king, and I hope to be the strong, compassionate leader you all deserve. He finishes up his speech and he gets everyone applauding, everyone clapping, a few people saying thank you, King Wu, and Toph of course comes over. Does this mean I'm off the hook? And Wu just says, for now, but I still hope you'll consider running for governor when Gowling finally holds its election. And she says, don't get your hopes up, Spindleshanks. I've had enough with the political shenanigans. I prefer the swamp. At least there, the predators are honest about wanting to eat you. So, I like that kind of as like the final tough line in a way in the book of like, that's been her view on politics from the start. And she was only kind of in on this because like, yeah, my sort of celebrity name might get us the win, but I really don't want to do this. But beyond that, I really like the way they sort of resolved this within the book. For one, like I was glad I was able to sort of predict this, and that like this is exactly what I've been saying I think they should do, of like keep it on the table, but you know, hold back on it for now, because the Earth Kingdom has been through a lot recently. Book 3 into Book 4, it's been nothing but like constant change and chaos in the Earth Kingdom. It was a little bit much to try and immediately change things so soon after any sort of stability is there. And I like how it links into the Hu Ting swamp vision from the previous volume, and Wu kind of taking that on board, that he acknowledges that, yeah, part of the reason he pressed ahead so quickly is because he sort of just wanted to be out as king as soon as possible. But he's taking on his responsibility here, which is like the whole theme of this whole book, mainly with Kuvira, but it's with Wu here as well. And that like he has become a good leader. The people are behind him, and this time as they transition is going to be good. And I want to see where Wu goes. Like I'm wondering, like, will Wu run for election somewhere or what? Because I think like they ended book 4 saying that like he's going to go off and become like a singer or something like that. And I think they have to do something more serious with him now, especially with what this book has done with him. But Greg, what are your thoughts on Wu's speech here and sort of the resolution of this plot here with the elections?
No, I think it's really good. I really think Wu gave like a really good speech here. I think, it's interesting to see, his improvement over time as sort of like a leader and him sort of growing into that sort of position here. I mean, he was, so unsure himself from the beginning. To see where he is now, he definitely, he's had like one of the largest growths, I think, as a character that we've seen here. I mean, I don't think he even made any sort of like random jokes or anything through this whole sort of like part of the book. So it's definitely cool to see him grow as a character. And Toph, her not sort of wanting to be about, anything to begin with, seems perfectly in character for her.
Mm-hmm. So then we get to the next scene. We once again return to the trial here. This tribunal will once again come to order. They call Varric, so they say his full name, Icknick Blackstone Varric, and basically they just get him to like confirm stuff that happened before. Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give, is the truth? That he says yes, and they say, you initially helped develop spirit energy technology for the Earth Empire, is this correct? Yes, but I tried to shut the project down once I realized how dangerous it was. And did Kuvira agree with your decision? No, she made me keep working on it, and she threatened to kill me if I didn't do what she said. She's a horrible, horrible person. And she says, that's enough, Varric. And he's like, please don't hurt me. And she's told, don't intimidate the witness, Kuvira. We will hear what he has to say. But she says, you don't need to. I confess to everything. I refused to turn over emergency powers and took over the Earth Kingdom because I thought I knew what was best for everyone. I was wrong. And though I wasn't fully aware of everything going on in the re-education camps, I should have been. I wanted so badly to wield power and to change the world. I didn't concern myself with the consequences. I wish I could forget the terrible things I've done, the people I've hurt, but I can't. I just hope that by taking full responsibility for what I've done, I can begin to heal some of the pain I've caused. So I'm entering a new plea. Guilty. So this ultimately, like, somewhat the way through this series, this was kind of clearly the path that they would have to take, is like taking responsibility for everything, and that's what she does here. Changing her plea, showing that she's grown, not just in actions and what she did, but also in terms of like admitting to things here in the court. And there's nice references in this to like stuff that they said before, of like, I wish I could forget, linking into the Guan scene, like the things I've done, people I've hurt. but she acknowledges that she can't do that and that she's going to take responsibility for everything, both in the past but also more recently with the whole Earth Empire thing. And I like the kind of cutaways here, like seeing Korra and Asami listening to this, especially Sue, her reaction to seeing this. With the only real sort of caveat that they add to any of this is that they continue to add in the whole idea of like she accepts responsibility for everything, but she didn't know everything that was going on in the re-education camps, which I suppose is ultimately a fairly important point to make, that like I think they're basically trying to get across the idea that like she never specifically maybe told them just to take people who weren't originally from the Earth Kingdom. That was just something that someone else decided, or something along those lines, maybe linking it into the brainwashing, I'm not sure. But they felt the need to say that again, which I think is relatively important, and I think links into, I think it was the part 2 conversation they had about like Guan saying like the reason I'm going ahead with this is because like I knew you'd probably agree to this, but then Kuvira argued that no, even brainwashing would be too far for me. But what are your thoughts on this second trial scene?
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting that they thought to put that in there. I don't know. It's interesting. I always take it to sort of mention that she didn't, like, she knew about them, but she didn't know what was necessarily going on in the camp specifically, not necessarily the part of like who gets taken who or whatever. Because I don't know, that seems like something that could go either way as far as her sort of being on the fence of, you know, doing what she thinks is right for the Earth Kingdom in general, since, you know, the fact that she wanted to take over Republic City, you know, makes me think that, you know, she sort of wants the people that are supposed to be there and the other people to just be somewhere else. Maybe not necessarily what went down in the re-education camps, you know, from what we know and what could potentially sort of be in them. So that is interesting to know. But yeah, it's interesting, the whole trial, how it is sort of like reflecting of, you know, how the whole book basically started. I think I really like the whole last scene where she says, you know, she enters her plea of guilty, because that's almost like a perfect mirror image of what, you know, the original scene of that actually was. Just that here she's, you know, a lot more composed as a character, has a lighter sort of like intention on her face, versus the original one. Obviously she was a lot more sort of manic and sort of crazy in it. So it's a really nice contrast, the way that they do those panels between the first and the last books here. But no, I think it's definitely interesting to see her sort of admit everything that she sort of has done wrong in the past.
Mm-hmm. Next we cut outside after this has all gone down, and it's Bolin saying that I'm going to have to hurry back to City Hall soon. President Moon has back-to-back meetings all afternoon. Mako just says, you're sticking with the job, huh? Being Commander Guan's lackey didn't turn you off to politics. And he just says, it may not be my true calling, but after everything we went through, I'm fine with a boring office job filing paperwork, at least for a while. And my reaction to this is just like, what was this Bolin thing in Ruins of the Empire? Like, we obviously had the idea of him moving away from being a police officer in Turf Wars, and we found out that he was Julie's assistant here. And in part 1, they had a Mako Bolin scene that gave us the impression that Bolin once again doesn't feel like this job is his path. But it's just his new thing, and Bolin and Mako pointed out like, oh yes, your new thing, like being a sports star, being a mover star, doing this, doing that, and trying to get across that, oh, like you're fickle, like you keep doing all these things, but like you never stick to any of it. And I don't think this is like any sort of resolution or anything like that. It's like, it's just this idea of like, being Commander Guan's lackey didn't turn you off to politics. Like, he was brainwashed. Like, he doesn't remember any of it. Like, it's just like, there's nothing to take away from that time. Like, this scene might as well have literally just happened straight after the scene in the first part, because like nothing happened for Bolin in between the two. So, like, it's even difficult, I think, to try and get across the idea that like Bolin's going into politics, because it seems like he's just her assistant rather than on any sort of like political path necessarily. Now, personality wise, I do think Bolin could be like a decent sort of politician character, because like he's good with the people, he seems to care about the people, he has that sort of celebrity appeal because of the movers and pro-bending stuff, and he's good with crowds and stuff. So it'd just be about developing his actual like political views, but it seems like we're miles away from that in any way happening. So it's just an arc that wasn't even an arc. It was just two scenes that kind of don't really communicate with each other all that much. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, Bolin as a character, I mean, he's definitely still developing. We definitely don't know where his end path is going to lie, as opposed to Mako, where he seems pretty sort of set in sort of his current ways. And I don't know, that's just sort of like his character as overall. So for Bolin, I don't know, it's odd. I mean, yeah, he was sort of like, they both were sort of lackeys of Guam, but it didn't really seem like they did that much. They were just sort of like, the hired muscles. So there wasn't really, there wasn't much political stuff that either of them really did in that sort of situation. They were just sort of brainwashed in there. So yeah, like you said, it really doesn't really seem to have as much bearing. I guess it's just sort of the idea that they were sort of involved with him, and he was sort of currently sort of just a leader type character, so they were sort of following him around. But without them having any sort of direct involvement in there, it doesn't really seem to have as much bearing as you say there. So I don't know. It seems like Bolin's just still sort of in that time and place where he's just sort of, he's still figuring things out. He's still, they're all relatively young characters, so it's not like there's any, I guess, sort of huge rush. It seems like, the story itself is sort of putting more the onus on Bolin to sort of choose something, and he's just sort of not ready for it.
Yeah, because like you could maybe link it into the fact that the elections have been delayed, with the idea of like, oh, like maybe when they do come around again, Bolin will want to run, but there's a long way to go before then, because like we don't know any of like Bolin is not a politician right now. He might be popular, but like we don't know if he's even learning anything like to be a politician. He just says like he's filing paperwork basically at the moment, and that it's boring basically. So I hope that at some point in the next comic there's like a mention that he is learning stuff from Julie as the president, and he can go from there, because you can sort of see the idea of like, oh, like he has family in Ba Sing Se, like if there's an election in Ba Sing Se, that might be where he goes for, because he does care about the people. When he was with the Earth Empire, he seemed to really like the sort of humanitarian aid kind of part of it, but not the rest, so who knows. Next scene, so as they're having this conversation, Kuvira is brought by the guards. Korra says to Kuvira, I respect you for everything you said in there, Kuvira. You really redeemed yourself. Mako says, and I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for what you did for us. Bolin just says, ditto. And then Asami says, it's going to take me a very long time to forgive you for taking my father's life. But I'm glad you are on our side this time. And Kuvira just says, me too. Now, these are another few of the pages that obviously, like a lot, if you've seen any of the sort of like reaction to this book, you might have seen some of the reaction to these pages of like, oh, all the characters are forgiving Kuvira too easily and stuff like that. I think that's kind of misinterpreting the pages, in that like, I get the tone here is positive towards Kuvira, but the dialogue is very like specifically about specific events rather than like they're best friends now, that they forgive her forever or anything like that. In that Korra's been on Kuvira's side this whole time. That's fine. We understand that. So Korra acknowledging Kuvira's change here is fine. Mako, we for the most part don't really have much of his views on Kuvira. He's just kind of like, she was the villain. I kind of got my arm hurt. Dealing with her. He has his issues because of that, and he just thanks her for basically being key to the brainwashing not happening, key to the elections not being rigged. Bolin says the same, and then Asami literally says, it's going to take me a very long time to forgive you for what you've done, but I too have to thank you for what you did this time, because again, Kuvira was the hero in this story, not the other characters. Like, Korra didn't really do that much. Asami didn't really do that much. It was Kuvira who performed most of the actions. That the reason we get to this ending is because of Kuvira, and they're just thanking her for that. And I think that's really it. Like, the characters now have a better opinion of Kuvira, but I don't think they're all best friends right now, because they haven't had like a detailed back and forth. We don't really know Kuvira's dynamic with these other characters beyond that. There's still tension between her and Asami over the whole Hiroshi thing, and then, the brothers, like, it's still unknown what their dynamic is with her. So really, of all of this group, the Team Avatar group, Korra is still the only one who in any way you would consider close to Kuvira. But what are your thoughts on the Team Avatar reaction here?
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't really consider any of them really that close. It just seems like they're acknowledging the sort of situation at hand here and sort of, Kuvira's hand and sort of helping bring it to a resolution. I mean, I would think, maybe Bolin, since he was part of the Earth Empire, he would be, he could be a character that I could see who could be, more upset than he currently is in this sort of moment here. But he's also the type of character that sort of, doesn't really, harbor any sort of like overly sort of bad feelings in general for people, even if they have sort of wronged him, or he seems to be able to get over them rather quickly, at least from what we've seen before. So for him, he's sort of like an oddball, so sort of, can go either way with him. And Mako is sort of like, he didn't have any sort of as much direct content as we've sort of seen here before. I mean, Asami is the main one that, if it was really, something that she said she forgave Kuvira super quickly, that, would be really, really sort of awkward and weird. That wouldn't seem like in character at all. So I don't know. It definitely seems like it'll be something that we'll have to see, if they're ever in sort of like the same sort of area, back in Zaofu, since that's where she's going to be, that things would actually sort of work out for them to be even better on terms. But that doesn't even seem like something that would sort of be happening. So it just sort of, she's just a character there that, sort of a person that they all know about and have been involved with, but don't have any, direct sort of, thing to really sort of deal with her at all for the most part.
Yeah, because like, most of the characters are fairly okay with Varric now, after, like, let's not forget, like, he was technically a villain back in, like, book 2, and, like, he directly had, like, a huge impact on, like, Asami and Mako, and I suppose even Bolin with just the betrayal of, like, someone who was close to him, but they're back on terms with him now. So obviously the Kuvira situation is much bigger and it's more impactful in a way, but it's just kind of showing here that the book's, I suppose, approach here is just that Kuvira has changed, and her change is coming across to the other characters, and they can see that, but they're not, like, it's not done right now. Like, they're not friends. She's not the new member of Team Avatar here. This isn't like, Zuko here type thing of, like, he's part of the group now, and it's going to take, like, an episode or two. No, it's going to be a good while, and I assume Kuvira is going to be used on, like, bigger events in the comics. Like, she's now open to sort of be, if we need someone notable, we can bring Kuvira in on this, because she's not been completely punished and locked away forever. So if we get permission, and we need the best of the best, Kuvira's there. But then we get, I suppose, the stuff we've been waiting for. Su Yin comes over to speak to Kuvira, and she says, "I owe you an apology, Kuvira. What are you talking about? I can't help but think that if I'd been a better mother, if I'd been a better mentor, a better mother, I could have guided you on a more appropriate path." Kuvira says, "You took me in when I was a wild, arrogant little girl, and cared for me when no one else did. There were so many times over the years when you could have abandoned me, but you never did, not even when I was at my worst. So you have nothing to apologize for. I'm the one who is sorry I never fully appreciated what an amazing, selfless mother you are." And the two of them hug. Kuvira says, "I wish we had more time." And Su says, "We will. I spoke with President Moon and the Tribunal. Thanks to your show of remorse, and because of your help in ending the Earth Empire and stopping Guan, they have all agreed to release you into my custody." And she's like, "I'm going home." And Su says, "Yes, you will be under house arrest, the same as Betar Jr., but if you even think about trying to escape, you'll be thrown right back into maximum security prison. Understood." And she says, "And is everyone all right with this arrangement? What will Betar Jr. say?" Opal speaks up and says, "Honestly, when Mom suggested the idea, we all thought she was crazy, but we came around, and I'm sure he will too. You may not have been born a Beifong." Then last page, but you'll always be part of this family, as we see, you know, the Beifongs here all kind of front and center, walking out together. You know, Sue has her like a hand on Kuvira's back, and they're kind of walking off together. Like, she's back in the family. They're gonna try with Kuvira as well, and it's ending on this kind of positive note of Kuvira's not gonna be completely locked away like Zahir is in the prison, and they'll be like cellmates or whatever. No, she's still gonna be punished, house arrest for, I guess it's like life house arrest. I don't really know, and she's gonna have the same punishment as Betar, basically. So it keeps the character sort of active, in that anytime we go to Zaofu, we'll get to meet Kuvira as well as the rest of the family, but she still is getting punished. So I think that's probably the best we could have hoped for, because ultimately, the second we saw Kuvira was on the cover for Runes of the Empire Part 1, and we knew what the book was going to be about, we were always going to be heading in this direction of redeeming Kuvira to some degree, to allow the character to be used that little bit more, and not have her be an Ozai, not have her be a Zahir, characters that we're never going to come back to, we're never going to see like released or anything like that. This was a character we want to use some more, so here's the arc for why she's not suffering that same punishment. And I think if there's one thing the book accomplished, it was that. It was definitely a little messy at points, but in general, I do like where they got to here. We got our, big Su-Yin Kuvira moment right here at the end, and basically lingering on the note of like Kuvira being able to truly appreciate what Sue did for her in taking her in when she was at her worst, and her coming out of that better, and now, basically apologizing for everything she did since then, of like, she ultimately betrayed the person who saved her, and here's her second chance now. In a way, it's Kuvira's second chance, after what happened with her parents, and now this is a nice moment, and I want to see what's next for Kuvira as a character. But what are your thoughts on the last few pages of the book here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's a nice way that they go about sort of, ending this sort of resolution here, having her to actually sort of, be in the fold of things. She'll be, under house arrest, like you said, but, she'll still, they have the potential to actually sort of use her as a character, with a character that, most people do really sort of like enjoy her character and think that she's interesting enough that it seems cool enough that, they would allow her to have some sort of way, to have sort of contact. I mean, I'm not sure, how much they'll actually sort of use her in the future, but, at least she'll be there. And if we ever cut back to Zaofu, there'll be the potential to sort of see her and to see what's sort of going on with her. So, I don't know. I think it definitely does happen in sort of like a quick way. And I don't know, maybe there's more specifics to sort of like her arrest here or whatever. I mean, I don't know. Sue always seems to have like a really good in with sort of like, the nations in general, which is always, I always find kind of interesting, because she just sort of, created this place and just sort of has all this sort of like respect from people. But, it definitely seems like she's able to use that towards her advantage when she needs to use it. So I don't know, I guess it sort of works. It definitely is, I've seen people say that it does seem like it's kind of a quick way about going things, but I don't know, it doesn't irk me too much, but I do think there is still a lot more that they probably need to do with the whole, family in general, and just Kuvira and her sort of situation, if, that's something that really they're going to sort of use in the future.
The reason I'm very okay with them sort of making a big move very quickly is because, on the counterpoint, the comics have been fairly bad about long-term storytelling. Like, look at Azula. Like it's been, 4 or 5 years since we've seen her in a comic, and, like, everyone wants to see the next stage of her arc. I don't want another one of them where we're just like asking every comic to be about her, just because it's this open arc. And I think they're cautious about that, and I think that's part of why they made sure to end on some sort of a note, so we didn't get a sort of like smoke and shadow type moment that was very like, wait, what position is Azula in? What way are we meant to feel about her? Is this her going back to being more of a villain, or is there still hope for her, or what? So that's kind of what I like here. They it's ultimately a relatively simple arc across the three books, in that like it is all about that theme of, you know, taking responsibility for your actions. Like that's the very simple way of saying it, but they added in the sort of nuance of like having that apply to both her past and the present. And I think that worked, of just you having these different opinions on like her parents, and that sympathetic backstory that was kind of told to us very quickly at the end of book 4. Now we feel about that very differently, in that it's not entirely sympathetic towards Kuvira, and like, okay, Kuvira is allowed to be upset regardless of her own actions that her parents gave her away, but she can now sort of acknowledge that she was wild. She did nearly kill her mother. There were reasons why that happened, and some of them were her own. Her own actions have caused what's happened to her to happen on all aspects of her life. That's why her relationship with Betar will take time to heal. Her relationship with Sue will take time to heal. I thought this book actually did a very good job of bringing a lot of that together with the Guan scene, and like the whole idea of like, these are things I want to forget, but actually they're the things she wants to redeem herself on most. And I think, yeah, the only thing that I really truly find like kind of baffling about this entire series is just that like, I think this series should have been very flashback heavy. This should have been like the search levels of flashback, where like we had like coming out of the three books like 30-40 pages of flashback covering stuff like the details of her and Betar like getting together, leaving Zaofu, the effect that had on the family, showing happy moments before that she was actually in a really good place, and that's why she was like captain of Sue's guard when we meet her in book 3, and things are going very well. Like she's close with Opal, she gets on very well with Wei and Wing, and they actually treat each other like brother and sister. That's what's missing, a lot of those sort of context things of, like I said at the very start of this review, it's this crazy thing that like prior to this book we basically had no scenes that really got across the idea that she was truly a part of the family. Just with the way they showed Kuvira in the series with Sue and everything, it was difficult to get across the idea that she was literally part of the family versus just sort of someone that Sue kind of mentored. And that's kind of interesting why in the end like there's almost that kind of like Sue being like, I could have been your mother differently type thing. So it's, again, it comes back to the idea of like, this is a conversation that we basically couldn't even have with Imbalance because it didn't have an arc to get into on this level. And here we are sort of going back and forth over the, you know, merits of how they did this very important character arc for a main character, and could they have done this or that, versus like the last books where like they didn't have a main arc for any of the characters. Rue was the like best character arc from Imbalance, and that was relatively minor in the grand scheme of things. So I still think the book overall deserves praise for the Kuvira arc, for the Earth Kingdom election arc with Wu, but yeah, definitely I'd like to see the main characters be used better as we go forward, because that's like 2 comics now where I don't think really most of Team Avatar has had much to do, and the 3rd Korra comic definitely needs to deliver. But what are your final thoughts on Runes of the Empire Part 3, and I suppose just Runes of the Empire as a series?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think overall it's pretty good. It definitely does a good job of continuing, you know, the original sort of series and getting across sort of, you know, what sort of the immediate sort of aftermath is like for some of the characters. I think, you know, there's definitely more that they could have done if they had, you know, either the page count or just sort of, you know, sort of figured how, you know, sort of plot lines would have worked with together. But I think, you know, the fact that we got sort of a resolution to Kuvira as sort of being sort of like, you know, the last sort of villain character, and one that, you know, generally is pretty much, you know, sort of liked by people, you know, either on the good side or the bad side of things. You know, getting the actual resolution to her story, I think, was for the most part pretty good. I think there's definitely a lot more that can be done with her, especially with, you know, in regards to her history. But, you know, the fact that she's still around and sort of, you know, in the thick of things potentially, I think, does give sort of, hope for future stories that could be pretty interesting.
And yeah, it's one of those things where like I'd be surprised if Kuvira played a main role in like the next comic. I think we'll maybe, as we start off the plot, touch on like what's going on, and then the plot will start. And I think for the most part she won't be in the next one, but maybe the one after that, maybe Korra Comic 4 might require Kuvira to be used on the next mission or something like that. They're the type of things that I think we might see, and like there might be a need for like, oh, but we need Betar and Kuvira to come with us as like a team, or something like that, or you pair Opal and Kuvira up and we get more of like the specifics with that dynamic, which is either kind of weakly written here or a setup for something kind of bigger in the future. There's a lot of things they can do from here, and that like the long-term storytelling now is that as the comics go on, we will, I suppose, gradually start to see specific parts of the Earth Kingdom have their elections, have their new elected officials, and I suppose we're probably building up to maybe some of the bigger ones, like what's going to happen with Ba Sing Se, maybe Omashu, maybe even the idea of like, what does Zhao Fu do in all of this with the elections? I think we've mentioned that in all of the reviews so far, but that wasn't really brought up as such. Those questions, and they definitely leave the door open for stuff to do, but I think that probably is the Earth Kingdom on pause a little bit for now, and it feels kind of like the perfect time to go to the Fire Nation, which is what we've wanted to do in the Korra comics for a while now, and it feels like we've dealt with a lot of the immediate post-Book 4 stuff now, that unless they're going to go back to Tokuga straight away, which I don't think a lot of people want to right now, unless they have a big spirit plot going on, which I do want to get into, I'd prefer we go Fire Nation. But what are your thoughts on what they need to do next for the third Korra comic series?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the idea of the Fire Nation, as has been said time and time before, would be the sort of ideal thing to sort of go through, just as far as something that we haven't really sort of experienced before. I mean, there's various ways that they could go about actually sort of bringing that forward, as far as just sort of things that has happened in the past, or just sort of branching out and doing other things. So I don't know. I mean, I think that would be the most interesting for me. I mean, obviously, yeah, there's stuff that they could do in Republic Nation and United Nations, as far as just sort of, everything with, Julie and the whole presidency and everything. So there is stuff there that they could do, but no, I would hope that they would sort of branch out at this point.
And yeah, if it is Fire Nation, like it's not just that like, oh, we as fans want to go there. There's reasons to go there as well. It's like, one, Korra actually hasn't been there yet in the series, and as the Avatar, you'd want her to meet like the world leader in her nation, so there's a reason to go there. It's a way to properly, I suppose, introduce us to Azumi as a character, because we don't really know her that well. It's a way to reintroduce General Iroh into things, who, it's been a while since we've focused on him, and it'd be interesting to see like his views on his own nation and what him being part of the United Forces military means, compared to like, he technically should be the Crown Prince, but as far as we're aware, he's not. You introduce Izumi's daughter, who, it's up in the air about whether like, does that character exist, or are they not going to commit to that sort of dropped plot point that they made fairly clear to us was a dropped plot point? So that'd be cool, just to see like the Princess of the Fire Nation meet Honora, or whatever name they'll give her, and just get to see Zuko, maybe confirm a few things, like, is this finally the time we confirm Mei as Azumi's mother? That would be nice to see, because that's probably, I think, one of the main things that like I want either the next Avatar or the next Korra comic to do, is just to finally confirm some of those things. I just think it's crazy that we're approaching like 10 years since Mei and Zuko have been broken up, when it's so obvious that that's the canon ship. And yeah, I think, like Zuko gives you a reason to go there, and then, Mako, he has a reason to go to the Fire Nation to, maybe get introduced to the Fire Nation side of the family through like his mother, Naoki. Given that we explored the Earth Kingdom side, there's things you can do for sure, and I hope they go for that idea. It'd be interesting to see if they did something like that, where like they had to leave sort of Bolin behind in the city, and he has his plot with Zhu Li, and Mako gets to have some Fire Nation stuff. There's a lot they can do for sure, like depending on what group they have go off and stuff like that. But do you have any specific ideas of what you think they could do with the Fire Nation?
I mean, everything you mentioned would be really cool, just as far as just seeing, I don't know, seeing the characters sort of interaction in sort of a new place, I think would be interesting. And for them to cause, I mean, just as far as like, just sort of like general sort of politics, as far as like the world sort of like rebuilding and just sort of experience different things, I think that would be an interesting point to sort of see, how things are going there, and how, like, why didn't they support, sort of the issues that happened earlier on in the series? Like, why, couldn't they have done something? Like, maybe there's something else that's sort of going on that would lead them to sort of be, I don't know, slightly more inclusive. I mean, that could be, an issue in themselves, just sort of them sort of trying to figure out how to deal with everything after the war, and just sort of trying to stay out of, global sort of politics or something like that. I mean, that could be, something from their perspective that, the rest of the world or Korra has to sort of like get involved with. So I don't know. I think there's a bunch of different things that they could go with, and I don't know. I just interested to see how they could potentially explore that.
Yeah, like they could always do like spirit stuff in the Fire Nation, like a nation that isn't like sort of overly spiritual. That's an option. I think people have brought up the idea of like a lot of the books have been focusing on the idea of like, elections versus like inherited positions, and like the Fire Lord position is one of them. Would there be anything there in that, like, oh, might the Fire Nation decide to move to, electing a president or something like that, or are they fine continuing on with the Fire Lord kind of line? There's options for sure. That's something to explore. Like I said, with Iroh, I think people want to know what the situation is with regards to him and his place in the lineage, and if the daughter is a character and so on. And then I think for Mako, I really like if the daughter was a character and they kind of went back to that romance plot that they kind of dropped. Just because I think Mako needs something as a character. And that's why I'd want him to get some focus in whatever story it is in the Fire Nation. Just to see him around other firebenders more, and like especially him as being one of the better firebenders we've seen. That'd be interesting. Rather than just he's here because he's part of the team, and that's been his role so far in the first two books. So yeah, we're like I said, we're waiting for the announcement now on both books. We don't know about the next Avatar series or the next Korra series. I really hope they announce them both at the same time at this point. And I think maybe that might be something that does happen, given that it has been a while since, they've, announced anything, and the fact that we are now post Ruins of the Empire, and there's nothing new in terms of new content on the horizon. They need to do this. It'd be cool if they somehow managed to thematically link them together, like they're both Fire Nation books, but different kind of angles. But we'll see what happens. But yeah, that's been the review, and so the end of the podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.